Chapter 766, Grand Wedding. The Church of the Golden Light arrived. The disciples approached the wedding site in formation, surrounded by billowing fog. The Golden Crow tribe arrived. All sects and clans dispatched members to attend, to bear witness to the first grand wedding ceremony to occur in the southern domain in many years. It was unprecedented and unrepeatable. The wedding guests surrounded the huge lake. Hundreds of thousands of cultivators had arrived, perhaps nearing 80% of the population of the southern domain. It was impossible to take them all in with a single glance. Everywhere was densely packed with people, and the mass of wedding gifts delivered showed the incredible wealth of the southern domain. Grandmaster Aoyang and He Luohua arrived. They stood in the crowds, unable to get very close. However, from afar, they could see Meng Hao and Su Qing, as well as Fatty and Chen Fan. The two old men's faces broke out with benevolent smiles. They were happy and proud of themselves. They knew that these chosen of the southern domain were all former members of the Reliance sect. Tribes of the western desert also came, most of whom Meng Hao was familiar with, or the other way around. Even with hundreds of thousands of people present, there was no chaos. Fatty and the Blood Demon sect disciples kept everything orderly, and yet also colorful and dramatic. The atmosphere was cheerful. The sound of laughter and chatting filled the air. The powerful experts had gathered. This wedding was definitely one of the grandest and most important events to ever occur in the history of the southern domain. When she made her appearance, Su Qing was incredibly beautiful. She wore a red wedding gown, and Meng Hao stood next to her. All the onlookers began to cheer and call out blessings and well wishes. Congratulations to the exalted Meng Hao and goddess Su Qing on their marriage. Congratulations. May you live to a ripe old age in conjugal bliss and love each other for all time. Congratulations. The sound rolled out like waves in all directions. Meng Hao's heart was pounding. Even he couldn't stop himself from getting nervous. He also wore a long red robe, and his handsome features were filled with happiness. Caption ID equals Tatment / 66787. Align equals Align Center. Width equals 800. Official ISSTH art of Meng Hao and Su Qing on their wedding day / caption. He held Su Qing's hand as they floated there in midair, the center of all attention. Meng Hao took a deep breath and squeezed Su Qing's hand. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Taoists, many thanks to you for coming to witness my and Kinger's bonding ceremony. With that, Meng Hao and Su Qing clasped hands to the crowds. Su Qing's face was flushed, her heart thumping rapidly. Moments like these are when women are the most beautiful, the most nervous, and the most excited. The entire southern domain had come to bear witness to Meng Hao and Su Qing's entrance into a binding agreement for life. Rumble! An incredibly loud sound filled the air as 10 spirit-severing experts flew up into the air. They unleashed spectacular divine abilities that, from a distance, transformed into 10 beautiful balls of flame. The color of the sky instantly changed, and all the cultivators down below stared up in awe at the beautiful sight. The cultivation bases of the 10 spirit-severing experts exploded out as they caused the brilliant, colorful divine abilities to surge with power. Boundless light shone out, making it seem like there were 10 suns up in the sky. As the rumbling echoed out seemingly without end, the 10 spirit-severing experts continued to fuel the divine abilities, causing ripples of magic to constantly flow out above the crowds. Immediately, a buzz of conversation rose from the crowd as they watched the spectacle, their hearts trembling. Heavens, he really does deserve to be the blood prince of the Blood Demon sect. Despite their status, 10 spirit-severing experts are willing to put on a performance by summoning fireballs. In all the southern domain, only Meng Hao could pull something like this off. When the day of my bonding ceremony comes, if I could get some core formation cultivators to do something similar, that would probably be the most incredible thing in my entire life. Anyone watching closely could see that this was just the beginning. The divine abilities of the 10 spirit-severing experts suddenly changed. Shockingly, the fireballs began to connect together to form a long dragon and a colorful phoenix. The dragon and the phoenix were auspicious symbols that could bring prosperity and good fortune. They swirled through the sky in astonishing fashion, looking extremely lifelike. Next, 1,000 nascent soul cultivators flew up, stabilized themselves in midair, then closed their eyes and summoned their life force fire to create 1,000 flickering candles. Candlelight illuminated heaven and earth, creating a resplendent and indescribably beautiful atmosphere. The display still wasn't over. After the appearance of the 1,000 nascent soul cultivators, 10,000 core formation cultivators flew out. They circled about in midair, unleashing magical techniques that seemed to create the outline of a staircase that stretched up into the sky. The staircase glittered like a magical treasure and was completely astonishing. The glittering light from the candles made it seem like even the heavens were participating in the wedding ceremony. The dragon and the phoenix crisscrossed through the air, occasionally letting out piercing cries. The atmosphere at the wedding ceremony seemed to have reached a pinnacle. Just when many assumed the pomp was over, two colorful beams of light shot into the air. They were two old men who, despite their blank expressions, immediately caught the attention of the crowds. They were the Golden Frost Sect Patriarch and the Third Li Clan Patriarch. They were the peak Tao seeking left and right Dharma protectors of the Blood Demon Sect. As soon as they appeared in midair, they performed incantation gestures and then flicked their sleeves. Immediately, at the top of the seemingly never-ending staircase that rose up into the sky, the air began to twist and distort as it turned into an Immortal's Temple Palace. The Immortal's Temple Palace was enormous and dignified. Every tile that decorated its surface glowed like a magical treasure. This was an illusion summoned by the power of two peak Tao seeking eccentrics cultivation bases. That alone might not have been a huge deal. But the instant the temple palace appeared, a rainbow descended above it, and its beauty increased exponentially. It was then that cranes appeared, as well as innumerable other auspicious creatures. They flew gracefully through the air, calling out blessings. The entire scene was almost like a dream. Down below, the cultivators gasped. Never before had such extravagance been witnessed in the southern domain. It was at this point that Patriarch Song laughed, and then said, "Young friend Meng Hao, please allow me to add a bit of cheer to your grand wedding." He lifted his arm and pointed up into the sky, immediately causing energy to surge out. Up above, a brilliant glow shot out in all directions. Countless motes of light appeared, each of which transformed into the image of an immortal goddess. In the blink of an eye, they appeared on the temple palace, on the rainbow, on the staircase, above the candle flames. In unison, they clasped hands and bowed deeply to Meng Hao and Su Qing. They acted like bridesmaids, and at that moment the illusion up in the sky became even more realistic. That was because in each of the immortal goddess's hands could be seen a spirit fruit. All of the spirit fruits were real. This was the wedding gift of the Song clan. In the group from the Violet Fate sect, Peak Tao seeking expert Sun Tao chuckled. All of a sudden, his voice rang out. "Young lord, allow me to add some cheer to your grand wedding as well." With that, he spit out a mouthful of qi, which shockingly transformed into a gigantic pill furnace that came to rest outside the temple palace. Wisps of medicinal smoke rose up out of the furnace, swirling around the area. Within the wisps of medicinal smoke were numerous imperial bodyguards wearing golden armor. In total, there were 10,000 bodyguards who spread out in the area, emanating shocking energy. All of them turned toward Meng Hao, stabbed their swords down in front of them, and then dropped to their knees to kowtow. The cultivators down below were almost in a frenzy. 4 peak Tao-seeking experts had lent their hands to the affair, along with the magical images of the 10 spirit-severing experts, the burning candles of 1,000 nascent soul cultivators, and the treasure-like staircase of 10,000 core formation disciples. It was a scene that thoroughly astonished all of the cultivators down below. This is unheard of, completely unheard of. Immortal goddesses as bridesmaids, immortal soldiers as groomsmen, an immortal's palace as the temple, a rainbow to add blessings, an auspicious dragon and phoenix summoned by spirit-severing cultivators, wedding candles provided by nascent soul cultivators. Everything provided by cultivators. I'll never forget this bonding ceremony, even after I die. How incredible to be able to see something like this. Everyone was in a huge stir. A kind smile appeared on Pill Demon's face as he stood next to the Immortal's palace, looking down at Meng Hao and Su Qing. Let the ceremonies begin. There is no need to be concerned too much with trifles. However, you must still climb the treasured staircase, past the burning candles, and ascend to the Immortal's palace. Meng Hao took a deep breath and squeezed Su Qing's hand. It was trembling and a bit sweaty. They exchanged a glance and could see both nervousness and warmth in each other's eyes. They smiled and then flew forward to the staircase. The immortal goddesses bowed as they passed, and the immortal soldiers kowtowed. They ascended the stairs, past the candles and the circulating dragon and phoenix. Finally, they stepped onto the rainbow. The cranes and auspicious beasts clustered around them as they stood in front of the immortal's palace temple. They turned, and from their vantage point they could look out to see the Milky Way Sea, and look down to see the hundreds of thousands of cultivators below, all cheering and shouting. The sound echoed out in all directions, shaking heaven and earth. The sound of it even reached all the way to the Milky Way Sea. By this point the bonding ceremony was half finished. Next was the most critical part. Pill Demon would officiate. Pill Demon looked at Meng Hao and Su Qing, and then his voice boomed out, "It is my pleasure to announce." Down below the crowds cheered wildly. However, before Pill Demon could finish, even as the crowds were cheering, Meng Hao's expression suddenly flickered. A sharp light appeared in his eyes as he looked out at the Milky Way Sea. Although it appeared normal, something had abruptly caused him to shake with fear. It was as if some shocking danger was lurking in the Milky Way Sea, as if an enormous gaping mouth full of teeth were approaching. In the same moment that Meng Hao looked out toward the Milky Way Sea, all of the peak Tao-seeking experts felt similar trembling in their hearts. They, too, looked out toward the sea. Although everything looked normal, Meng Hao blinked his right eye 9 times and circulated the chi of immortal shows the way. His view of the world blurred, then grew clear. Now, he was able to see 2 different worlds. The first world was the normal Milky Way Sea. In the second world, the sea was in a fury, waves surging and roaring. An enormous, shocking bridge formed from a resurrection lily could be seen. On top of the bridge were hundreds of thousands of Northern Reaches cultivators, surging forward with towering murderous intent. Among the Northern Reaches cultivators was an enormous stone cauldron, supported on the backs of 10,000 cultivators. The cauldron seemed ancient, and its insides were filled with pitch-black dirt. Shockingly, a single stick of incense could be seen sticking up out of the soil. The incense stick was small, far smaller than the huge cauldron, and easy to miss. However, the feeling it gave off was one of complete terror and evil. Even the peak Tao-seeking experts of the Northern Reaches seemed to fear it. The forces from the Northern Reaches drew closer and closer. As of this moment, they had almost reached the lands of the Southern Domain. This chapter was sponsored by Junior 4-2, Byron Cito, and Anonymous. Chapter 767, The Northern Reaches Invades. Northern Reaches, thought Meng Hao, his pupils constricting. Currently, the other peak Tao-seeking experts were unable to see what Meng Hao was seeing, except for Pill Demon. His eyes began to shine with golden light and his face fell. The cheers were still echoing out through the air as all the cultivators down below awaited Pill Demon's words of officiation and the final moments of the wedding ceremony. However, Meng Hao and Pill Demon's hearts froze up and, as of this moment, were sinking to the lowest depths. From the expression on Meng Hao's face, Su Qing could immediately sense that something was wrong. "What's wrong?" she asked, nervously gripping his hand. "The Northern Reaches are invading us," he said quietly, clasping her hand tightly. Although none of the cultivators below could hear what he said, the nearby peak Tao-seeking patriarchs' faces suddenly fell. "That's—" Pill Demon's eyes went wide as he looked at the enormous, shocking bridge that stretched out over the Milky Way Sea, as well as the enormous cauldron drawing nearer and nearer. Pill Demon's face flickered. Worried that panic would ensue, he kept his voice low. "Meng Hao, look closely. Do you see that stone cauldron with no decorations filled with pitch-black soil? Is there an incense stick sticking out of the soil?" Even as Pill Demon spoke, the cheering cultivators down below suddenly grew quiet. Expressions of confusion appeared on their faces, and soon, everyone began to realize that Pill Demon was looking at the Milky Way Sea. In response to Pill Demon's question, Meng Hao blinked his eye 9 more times. Instantly, his view of the Milky Way Sea zoomed in, and he confirmed that there was indeed an incense stick in the black soil filling the enormous cauldron. "Yes," he said, nodding his head. Pill Demon's face went ashen, and his pupils constricted. He immediately flew up into the air and called out in a loud voice, "Southern Domain cultivators, all of you must immediately unleash the power of your cultivation bases and interfere with the flow of spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Create a barrier immediately. Hurry." Patriarch Song, Apprentice Alchemist, and Meng Hao, come with me. Bring Patriarch Golden Frost and the 3rd Li Clan Patriarch. You must not under any circumstances allow that stone cauldron to touch the lands of the Southern Domain, roared Pill Demon as he shot toward the Milky Way Sea. That is none other than Hellwither Nine Ruins incense, refined from the flesh and blood of a true immortal. It is the most malicious of curses. If it even touches the land, the curse will spread out to all cultivators born in the Southern Domain. Their fleshly bodies will wither, and their cultivation bases will decline. There is no cure or antidote, and it is impossible to flee, not even by leaving the southern domain. Anyone born in the southern domain will be cursed. Patriarch Song's face fell, and Sun Tao of the Violet Fate sect had a similar reaction. Without hesitation, they followed along at top speed. Meng Hao's eyes flashed with killing intent. Today was his grand wedding, the most important day in his life. Su Qing had less than 100 years of longevity, and all he wanted was to give her a magnificent wedding. Unfortunately, they had been interrupted halfway through. The arrival of the Northern Reaches cultivators was completely unforeseen. How could Meng Hao not be enraged? He looked at Su Qing, and although her heart was filled with concern, the only thing that could be seen on her face was a gentle expression. "The wedding ceremony isn't over yet," she said softly. "I'll be waiting here for you." Meng Hao nodded, then flew up into the air. His second true self materialized next to him, and Patriarch Golden Frost and the third Li Clan Patriarch emerged from within the Immortal's palace. In the blink of an eye, they all transformed into beams of light that shot toward the Milky Way Sea. The spirit-severing cultivators who had formed the dragon and phoenix immediately appeared. The power of their cultivation bases surged out, causing the air to distort. Down below, the hundreds of thousands of other cultivators, still reeling in shock because of the sudden developments, also unleashed the power of their cultivation bases. It only took a moment for the air to distort, and a violent windstorm to rise up. Meanwhile, the Northern Reaches cultivators on the Resurrection Lily Bridge over the Milky Way Sea realized that they had been discovered. With no further need to conceal their presence, rumbling filled the air, and the appearance of the Milky Way Sea instantly changed. It no longer looked sunny and calm. Instead, massive waves surged across its surface, as well as numerous corpses. Those corpses were none other than Milky Way Sea cultivators. Also fully visible was the ferocious-looking Resurrection Lily Bridge, as well as the million Northern Reaches cultivators, stretching out in formation like a huge dragon. "Within a month the southern domain will be destroyed," a cold and ancient voice rang out. It was an old man within the Northern Reaches forces. He wore animal-hide clothing, and a necklace of bone teeth was strung around his neck. He flew up into the air, followed by three shocking figures. Of those three people, two were old men and one was a boy. The two old men looked exactly alike, except that one wore all black clothing and the other wore all white. Astonishingly, their cultivation bases were at the peak of Tao seeking. As for the boy, he held a cinnabar fruit in his hand, which he would occasionally gnaw at. A red glow could be seen in his eyes, and he was surrounded by a thick, murderous air. He was also at the peak of Tao seeking. These four people were the patriarchs leading the first wave of the Northern Reaches army. A few days behind them was the second wave of hundreds of thousands of Northern Reaches cultivators. The first wave was so close that they could see the mountains of the southern domain, as well as the 6 bright beams of light shooting through the air. At the same time, they also noticed the shocking windstorm created by the cultivation bases of the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, which rose up into the sky, emitting shocking power. These southern domain cultivators are clever. They actually sensed us ahead of time and knew exactly when we would arrive. Not only did they know the time, they also knew the place and are in combat readiness. They've even combined the cultivation bases of several 100,000 cultivators into a windstorm. They hope to reduce the power of our sacred balm. From their reaction, it seems they actually know about our plan. Thankfully, we're thoroughly prepared. It's too bad the sacred balm is most effective when they are scattered. Of the 6 people approaching, 4 are at the peak of Tao seeking. One is early Tao seeking, and the third, the red-robed youth. It seems he's only a second severing cultivator. Whatever, it doesn't matter. We'll stick to the plan and sacrifice our sacred balm. The 4 Northern Reaches patriarchs exchanged glances, and then the old man with the bone-tooth necklace snorted coldly. He produced a red medicinal pill covered with bizarre magical symbols, which he immediately consumed. Then he stretched his hands out and lifted his head back to let out a wild roar. Dragonfish transformation. At the same time, his body instantly began to expand and grow scales. In the blink of an eye, he was dozens of meters tall and bulging with muscles. Shockingly, the bone teeth around his neck shot out to swirl around him in a spherical spell formation. Rumbling filled the air, along with a roar from within the spell formation. Suddenly, a huge black crocodile emerged, 300 meters long. The crocodile slapped its tail down, causing ripples to spread out. Immediately, the 10,000 cultivators bearing the huge stone cauldron flew forward and landed on the crocodile's back. The crocodile let out a roar, and its eyes began to glow red as it charged forward toward the southern domain. As for the several-meter-tall old man, his body emanated savage energy as he followed, acting as an escort to the crocodile. Behind him, the two old men who looked identical except for the contrasting black and white clothing both swished their sleeves. Shockingly, they began to emanate an incredible aura of death. Even more astonishing, two hopping vampires appeared behind them, also wearing contrasting black and white clothing. 1. Here is some info about hopping vampires. And here is a picture. The two hopping vampires had long teeth and vicious expressions. They wore hats and moved in leaping motions along with the two old men as they escorted the stone cauldron. Last was the young boy. As he advanced, a giant emerged from the forces atop the Resurrection Lily Bridge. It wielded an enormous wolf-tooth club and roared as it shot forward, kicking up a huge wind. The boy flew up to stand on its shoulder. He had eaten almost half of the cinnabar fruit and held the other half in his hand, rubbing it occasionally. The crocodile in the lead position had bright red, glowing eyes. It roared as it advanced at top speed, transforming into what almost looked like a black lightning bolt. As it neared the southern domain, Pill Demon, Patriarch Song, and the apprentice alchemist Sun Tao rushed to meet it. There was no talking. As soon as they met, the fighting began. Boom! Sun Tao summoned a pill cauldron that emanated medicinal smoke. Within the smoke appeared countless warriors in golden armor that immediately blockaded the entire area. Patriarch Song gave a cold snort and performed an incantation gesture. Instantly, the spiritual energy in the area faded, and a copper coffin appeared, the precious treasure of the Song clan. As for Pill Demon, he shot directly toward the stone cauldron. The crocodile roared, as did the several-meter-tall old man next to him. Suddenly, the old man flickered and appeared directly in front of the crocodile, then punched out. "Piss off," he cried. Boom! The fist strike was backed by the power of his fleshly body. It shattered the air as it screamed toward Sun Tao's golden warriors. Immediately, the warriors began to wither and collapse into pieces. The old man was extraordinarily strong. Natural law swirled around him, making the entire area around him his own. He barreled forward, smashing through the barricade, followed by the crocodile. Meanwhile, the old men in the black and white clothes closed their eyes. Their bodies grew blurry, and astonishingly, they merged with the two hopping vampires behind them. The eyes of the hopping vampires suddenly began to glow with intelligence. As they leaped forward, their death aura rose up into the air, transforming into a vortex. Countless pale white arms then stretched out from within the vortex. One of the hopping vampires shot toward Patriarch Song, the other headed to block Pill Demon. The last to make a move were the boy and the mountain-like giant. The giant brandished its wolf-tooth club and the boy pointed out, causing Sun Tao's face to fall. All of a sudden, a huge blister bulged out of the boy's forehead. It was bright red and looked exactly like a cinnabar fruit. A battle between peak Dao-seeking experts exploded out in the blink of an eye. Booms filled the air as Meng Hao approached, followed by his second true self and the left and right Dharma protectors. "Hayar," said Pill Demon urgently, "block that stone cauldron, don't let it touch the ground." Having sized up the battle, Meng Hao's eyes flashed, and he shot like lightning toward the crocodile. The several-meter-tall old man in front of the crocodile had a fleshly body that could crush enemies like dried weeds. When he saw Meng Hao approaching, he completely ignored him and focused on the three peak Dao-seeking cultivators next to him. "Screw OFFFFF," roared the old man, punching out into the air. This chapter was sponsored by Anonymous, DRK, and Espen Leonhardsen. Chapter 768, Hellwither 9 Ruins. Boom! The old man's punch gave rise to an enormous vortex, the center of which was black, like a black hole. A terrifying gravitational force exploded out, distorting the air as it shot toward Patriarch Golden Frost. Patriarch Golden Frost's expression was blank, but he had a peak Dao-seeking cultivation base. He waved his hand, causing mist to billow out, which then formed together into a mist sword that shot toward the vortex. The third Li Clan Patriarch glided through the air, the glow of spell formation swirling beneath his feet. As he shot through the air, he left behind sealing marks that emanated powerful ripples. In the blink of an eye, he had circled completely around the old man and the crocodile, surrounding them with sealing spells. Meng Hao's second true self waved his right arm. His eyes glittered as the wooden time sword circled around him, and a river of time power swept out. He advanced, stepping through the air to appear right next to the crocodile, whereupon he reached his hand out toward the stone cauldron. As for Meng Hao, he slapped his bag of holding to produce the lightning cauldron, then cast a cold glance toward the old man in the animal's skin garments, and waited for the right opportunity. The old man's face was vicious as he lifted his head up and roared. Again, he grew larger, and a mocking smile twisted the corners of his mouth. It was at this point that he actually self-detonated. This sudden self-detonation of a peak Tao-seeking cultivator was something nobody in the area could have predicted. Such a gambit was fundamentally inconceivable. And yet it happened. As his fleshly body exploded, roaring filled the air, and shocking ripples surged out in all directions. All the natural law in the area was disturbed, and everything was locked down, making teleportation impossible. Patriarch Golden Frost and the third Li clan patriarch quickly fell back and used their full power to fight back against the power of the self-detonation. Meng Hao's second true self had no choice but to do the same and evade. As for the crocodile, it transformed into a black lightning bolt that shot forward at incredible speed toward the southern domain. In the blink of an eye, it was in midair, just about to slam into the ground. The stone cauldron on its back began to emanate black light. The black soil inside the cauldron began to squirm and writhe, and the incense stick began to spontaneously combust. Smoke swirled up, and the faces of all the southern domain cultivators fell. Pill Demon, Patriarch Song, and Sun Tao of the Violet Fate Sect all shot back toward it at high speed in an attempt to block it. The old men dressed in black and white laughed and flew forward in pursuit. As for the young boy who continuously stroked the cinnabar fruit, he also followed. In the blink of an eye, the entire group was above the southern domain, getting ready to attack. When Meng Hao saw the crocodile descending toward the ground, his hand shot up and he pointed forward. Eighth Demon Sealing Hex. Immediately, invisible demonic chi formed together. It wrapped around the crocodile, which suddenly stopped in place. It struggled to free itself, but before it could, a golden vortex appeared around it. Blood Demon Grand Magic. The golden vortex spun round and round, causing chi and blood, as well as cultivation base, to be sucked out of the crocodile. At the same time, Meng Hao shot forward at top speed. It only took a moment for him to close in on the stone cauldron, and then reach his hand out in preparation to grab it. "Looking to die," said the two old men in black and white. With cold snorts, they descended upon Meng Hao, although Patriarch Song and Sun Tao immediately moved to intervene. The boy who stood on the giant's shoulder laughed coldly, tossed the remaining half of the cinnabar fruit off to the side, then flew into the air to charge toward Meng Hao. At this point, the left and right Dharma protectors immediately approached with all the speed they could manage. A truly chaotic battle was unfolding. Meng Hao was almost on top of the crocodile and was just about to make contact with the cauldron when suddenly, his eyes widened. A strange feeling arose within him, something he could sense only because of his status as a demon sealer. It felt as if some terrifying crisis was at hand. It wasn't just him who felt it. His second true self also had a similar feeling, which Meng Hao could sense through their connection. It was at this point that a withered hand suddenly burst out from the soil inside the stone cauldron. The hand was clenched into a fist which punched out toward Meng Hao's grasping hand. An ancient voice echoed out from within the stone cauldron, "Measly spirit severing cultivator, screw off." A huge boom exploded out. Meng Hao could sense an incredible power rushing toward him like floodwaters. Cracking sounds immediately sounded out from his body. If he didn't have a Tao-seeking fleshly body, this punch would have severely injured him. However, his eternal stratum immediately went to work healing him. Not only did he not fall back, his eyes began to radiate a murderous air. His right hand reached out and grabbed the withered fist, then wrenched at it violently. Boom! The soil in the stone cauldron exploded out as an old man wearing animal hide garments was jerked out by Meng Hao. When he appeared, the crocodile's body began to wither even faster. Part of its life force and cultivation base was being absorbed by Meng Hao, but the majority was being sucked up by the old man. As he absorbed the power, he rapidly returned to his previous several-meter-tall appearance. He wasn't dead after all. What had self-detonated was not his true self, but a clone. "Tao Spirit Pill," exclaimed Pill Demon, his eyes widening. Tao Spirit Pills were rare in the lands of South Heaven. It was a type of ancient medicinal pill, few of which existed. When a Tao spirit pill fused into a cultivator's aura, it produced an incarnation which could not exist for a very long time, perhaps enough time for an incense stick to burn. The self-detonation had been caused by none other than the Tao spirit pill incarnation. As soon as the old man in animal skin clothing was wrenched out of the soil by Meng Hao, a look of shocked surprise could be seen in his eyes. However, the expression quickly turned into one of ferocity as he punched out with his left hand. Meng Hao's eyes glittered with coldness as he also punched out. A huge boom could be heard, and blood oozed out of the corners of Meng Hao's mouth. He shot backward through midair and then exploded. However, even as the blood and gore began to shoot out, they pulled back together to reform his body. The old man in animal skin clothing laughed loudly and said, "I am the high priest of the imperial bloodline clan of the northern reaches. Fellow Taoists from the southern domain, you might be fast, but are you fast enough to stop this?" He reached out and grabbed the stone cauldron, hauled it up into the air, and then threw it toward the ground. The stone cauldron moved with incredible speed. In only a moment, it was less than 1,000 meters from the ground. Patriarch Song, Sun Tao and the left and right Dharma protectors pursued as fast as they could. They wanted to teleport, but the self-detonation of the old man's clone had sent the area into chaos, making teleportation impossible. That was his plan all along, and it was working perfectly. The two men wearing black and white, as well as the young boy, did everything in their power to prevent the stone cauldron from being blocked. All they needed to do was delay for a few moments. Considering their opponents were of the same stage as them, that was no difficult task. When Meng Hao's body finished forming back together, his eyes were calm. His second true self neared, and they both flew out together. As the second true self unleashed a river of time power, Meng Hao produced the lightning cauldron and then pushed down on it, simultaneously looking at a boulder down on the ground. A boom rattled out from the lightning cauldron, and lightning crackled, causing everyone to look over. However, the instant they caught sight of Meng Hao, he vanished. In his place was an enormous boulder. At the same time, Meng Hao appeared in the previous location of the boulder, down on the ground. He then shot up into the air and grabbed hold of the stone cauldron. Impossible! The old man in animal skin clothing stared in disbelief. It wasn't just him. The old men in black and white clothing, as well as the young boy, all stared with wide eyes. They almost couldn't believe that a spirit-severing cultivator would be able to do something like this. Furthermore, the smoke from the incense stick swirled out and entered into Meng Hao's body to wither it. However, his eternal stratum completely suppressed that power. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with determination. He could not allow the thing to continue to burn, so he reached out with his right hand to extinguish it. However, even as he grabbed the burning head of the stick between his fingers and squeezed, an incredible power radiated out. Once the incense stick was ignited, it could not be put out. "Fine, I don't need to put it out," thought Meng Hao, his eyes radiating coldness. With that, he produced the lightning cauldron and then looked around. A moment later, his eyes came to rest on the crowds of northern reaches cultivators still above the Milky Way Sea. "No, howled the northern reaches experts, turning to shoot toward Meng Hao. They were a bit too slow. The lightning cauldron rumbled and lightning flashed. Meng Hao's body vanished, replaced by a confused-looking northern reaches cultivator. As for Meng Hao, he was now above the Milky Way Sea, in the middle of the crowds of northern reaches cultivators. He immediately tossed the stone cauldron down toward the cultivators on the bridge. His incredible speed made it impossible to obstruct his way. Rumbling sounded out as the cauldron descended and then exploded. Utilizing the force of the detonation, the incense stick burned all the way to the end, releasing boundless strands of gray smoke. The smoke seemed sentient and hungry for flesh and blood. It immediately began to search for nearby bodies, then started boring into the hundreds of thousands of northern reaches cultivators. Some of them even bored into the resurrection lily, causing some sections of the bridge to turn gray. Miserable shrieks could be heard as the horrified northern reaches cultivators found smoke burrowing into them and withering their bodies before they could even step foot into the southern domain. Meng Hao heaved a sigh of relief, but the sense of danger he felt did not dissipate. Instead, it grew stronger to the point where his scalp was numb. "What's going on?" he thought, shooting up into the air as gray smoke swirled toward him. Suddenly, Meng Hao caught sight of something far off in the distance. It was a half-eaten cinnabar fruit falling towards the ground. When he saw it, his eyes went wide. It was almost impossible to tell, but the cinnabar fruit was burning. If you looked closely, You could tell that hidden almost undetectably inside of the cinnabar fruit was an incense stick. Demon also could sense that something wasn't quite right. The incense smoke he saw was just like the Hellwither Nine Ruins incense he remembered, but he still had the feeling that they had overlooked something. His face flickered as he looked around and then suddenly saw the cinnabar fruit that the Northern Reaches boy had casually tossed away. Not good. The cinnabar fruit itself didn't seem extraordinary. The only noteworthy thing about it was that it had been bitten in half. It hadn't fallen fast, which made it hard to spot. By the time it was discovered, it had already landed. A rumbling sound could be heard as the cinnabar fruit shattered into pieces. Hidden inside it was half of an incense stick, much smaller than the incense stick in the stone cauldron. However, it was burning, and as soon as it touched the ground turned gray. Then the grayness spread out rapidly. There was no way to stop it. Meng Hao's face fell. This chapter was sponsored by Daniel Rodriguez, Count Gray Shin, Philip Schroeder, Clement Morisau, Nam Tran, A. Darkstar, and Jack Landry Kingney. Chapter 769, The Power of the Curse. Hellwither Nine Ruins was refined from the blood, flesh, and fat of a true immortal. By congealing the deep rancor felt by a true immortal in the moments before death, a powerful curse was formed. As long as it didn't touch any land, its power was ordinary. However, once it touched the land, the power of the curse would be unleashed on all living things born in that land. It only had one fatal flaw, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say a weakness. While it was true that it used the refined rancor of a true immortal's flesh and blood to curse the land, the curse couldn't be sustained for very long. At most, it would last 3 months before the land naturally purified itself. Unfortunately, 3 months was enough time for all of the cultivators in the southern domain to be completely withered up and weakened to the point of death. For those who didn't die, their cultivation bases would be significantly reduced. The best way to use it was to enact the curse the moment the army arrived. Then, the Northern Reaches army could slaughter their way in like a thunderbolt and quickly eliminate the foundation of the southern domain. The Northern Reaches placed significant importance on the war with the southern domain. Because of that, the Imperial Bloodline clan had spared nothing, not even the final remnants of its Hellwither Nine Ruins incense, of which there was not one piece, but two. One of the incense sticks had been used in an overt attack, the other in a sneak attack. That way, they hoped to ensure that at least one of the incense sticks touched the ground of the southern domain. The Northern Reaches only had 2 chances, and both of those chances were due to the bizarre treasures of the Imperial Bloodline clan. The Imperial Bloodline clan could actually trace its origins back to the southern domain. However, long ago, they were suppressed by Lord Jai when he unified the 4 great planets and became the Lord of the Ninth Mountain. As for the Imperial Bloodline sect of the Northern Reaches, they were actually a branch of the Imperial Bloodline clan, with the same bloodline. The only difference was that, instead of following the Imperial Bloodline's internal family hierarchy, its structure was set up in the form of a sect. Furthermore, they had sent out a big announcement to attract outsiders to join, and thus increase their overall power. Under normal circumstances, the Northern Reaches would not dare to use such a bizarre treasure right under the noses of the Jai clan in the eastern lands, not even with the southern domain in chaos. But now, the true immortality destiny had appeared. During this period of time, whoever came out on top in the struggle for the immortality destiny would be able to achieve true immortal ascension. Using a special technique, the Imperial Bloodline clan was able to determine that the source of the immortality destiny was in the southern domain. That was why they attacked with such madness. By occupying the southern domain, they could control the source of the immortality destiny. Currently, miserable shrieks could be heard coming from the crowds on the Resurrection Lily Bridge. The first wave of hundreds of thousands of Northern Reaches cultivators screamed as their bodies were withered and their cultivation bases dropped. They were sustaining significant losses before they even stepped foot into the southern domain. That caused the 4 Peak Dao-seeking leaders who had come with this first wave to go mad. Their hatred for Meng Hao instantly exploded to monstrous heights. However, the lands of the southern domain were still in imminent danger. In the blink of an eye, the grayness of the Hellwither Nine Ruins incense spread out rapidly, and it wouldn't take long for it to cover the entire southern domain. It was a deep gray, almost black. Plants and vegetation withered and died as far as the eye could see. Wild animals screamed miserably and tried to flee, but rapidly weakened and then fell to the ground, trembling, eyes filled with despair. Up in midair, Patriarch Song's face went pale white. Even though he was floating above the ground, his body instantly began to emanate black smoke. The same thing happened to Sun Tao, the third Li clan patriarch, and patriarch Golden Frost. Black smoke curled up as their flesh and blood began to rot. It was the same with Pill Demon. "Hell with her nine ruins incense," said Pill Demon with a bitter chuckle. "The northern reaches want to cut off our southern domain cultivator's foundation. This curse. Even if we flee the southern domain at top speed, it won't do any good. Anyone born in these lands will be incapable of fleeing. This curse is so potent." Even as he spoke, black smoke rose up from his body in wisps and the grayness spread further. If only we could stop the curse from spreading. But how? It was in this moment that Pill Demon, his face twisted with sorrow, looked over at Meng Hao, who was trembling with rage, his eyes bloodshot. Pill Demon gaped. "Hey, you're not affected by the curse." Meng Hao's body wasn't emanating any black smoke at all. Earlier, before the Hell with her nine ruins incense touched the ground, it had affected him. But now that the southern domain had been cursed, only people born there would be affected. However, Meng Hao didn't seem to be affected at all. As for his second true self, it had been created using his own fleshly body, so it was the same. Meng Hao didn't have time to think about why the curse wasn't affecting him. His eyes were shot with blood as he flew down toward the ground. There was nothing he could do to stop the curse's rapid spread, and its grayness had already reached the wedding site. Everything was turning gray. At the site of the wedding, hundreds of thousands of cultivators were combining their cultivation base power to form a windstorm in a desperate attempt to fight back. The purifying effect of the windstorm was somewhat effective in reducing the power of the curse, but could not completely block it. Black smoke was already starting to roil up in shocking fashion. By now, the four northern reaches peak Dao-seeking experts had noticed that Meng Hao was wearing garments that cultivators normally wouldn't wear. They also saw the wedding decorations off in the distance. Finally, they understood. "Don't tell me that the southern domain cultivators were actually gathered here to attend this guy's wedding," said the old man in the animal skins. His eyes flashed with a bright light. The two men who looked like animated corpses smiled ruthlessly. "Hundreds of thousands of cultivators gathered for a cultivator bonding ceremony," said one of them. "It's destined to be soaked with the color of blood." "Ha ha," laughed the young boy. "A wonderful red wedding, one. Yes, this is the same term used to describe the red wedding in Game of Thrones, at least in the TV show. It literally means blood-colored wedding. But considering it appears to be a direct reference to the Red Wedding, I think this is the best way to translate it. Incidentally, Game of Thrones is also popular in China. Some people download it, others watch the subtitled, edited version which is available to view streaming online. That version is mostly edited for sex, not violence. It's too bad they're all gathered together, though. If they were scattered out across the land, the Hell with her nine ruins could spread out with even greater impact. Now, it seems it will be a bit weaker." Meng Hao shot at top speed back toward the site of the wedding. He immediately burst through the windstorm to appear above the island in the lake. Su Qing, Chu Yuyan, everyone was sitting cross-legged, pouring the power of their cultivation bases into the windstorm to fight back against the curse. Su Qing's body was trembling especially hard, because of her unique situation. The curse affected her even more severely than the others. As soon as Meng Hao saw Su Qing, his eyes filled with resolve. He stretched out his right hand and slammed it hard onto the surface of the ground. Immediately, the fourth level of the Blood Demon Grand Magic spun into motion. Instead of absorbing blood or cultivation bases, he would use the Blood Demon Grand Magic Vortex to try to absorb the curse power of the Hell with her nine ruins. Meng Hao wasn't sure if it would work, but he could think of no other options. The northern reaches had invaded on the day of his wedding. A joyous occasion had become lifeless. This was something he could not accept. His heart quivered, and he was on the verge of insanity. The Blood Demon Grand Magic spun rapidly, a golden vortex that encompassed him, the island, and the entire lake. It rotated rapidly, causing the lake water to also spin around. However, although it seemed as if the Hell with her curse was being affected at first, it suddenly seemed to completely ignore Meng Hao. "Get over here," he roared. He ripped open a huge gash in his right palm, sending bright red blood splashing down onto the ground. At the same time that the blood entered the soil, the Blood Demon Grand Magic reached the pinnacle of its speed. Finally, the Hell with her curse was affected and started to near him. However, it was going far too slow. "Second true self," he cried. His second true self shot down from up above and landed behind him. He sat down cross-legged, then stretched his right hand out and placed it on the middle of Meng Hao's back. By combining his own power with that of his second true self, Meng Hao was able to push the fourth level of the blood demon grand magic even faster. Rumble. It was like flinging a drop of water into a hot frying pan. The water in the lake boiled, with Meng Hao at the center. The Hellwither curse power that filled the land immediately began to surge toward Meng Hao. It followed his blood and flesh to his palm, where it entered his body. He instantly began to tremble, and his hair turned white. His body also started to wither as vast amounts of curse power gathered together within him. He was forcing the curse to fuse into him. The eternal stratum immediately surged into action as he used his own body to attempt to purify the land of the Hellwither curse. Any other person would be incapable of doing this. Meng Hao only had such a chance because he had the eternal stratum. Rumbling surrounded him as the eternal stratum restored his body. As soon as it happened, though, more curse power began to wither him away. It was a vicious cycle. In the short space of a few breaths of time, the eternal stratum restored his body countless times. Everything rumbled as the grayness in the area began to change. From up above in the sky, it was obvious that Meng Hao was like a black hole into which the grayness of the curse power was being sucked, cleansing the land. The four peak Dao-seeking experts from the northern reaches were completely shocked. Impossible. Who is he? That peak Dao-seeking cultivator is his clone. He was clearly not affected by the curse. He wasn't born in the lands of South Heaven 1. Questions have been directed to me in the comments section on Reddit and via email, so I'm adding this footnote. The original Chinese says South Heaven in this part. It is not a typo, but his physical body is actually so powerful that he can affect the Hellwither curse by himself. In all their years of cultivation, they had never encountered a cultivator as fearsome as this. Inhuman. In their shock, they flew forward in an attempt to stop Meng Hao. However, how could Patriarch Song and Pill Demon possibly let them do as they pleased? After all, they had now seen a ray of hope. Along with Sun Tao, Patriarch Golden Frost, and the third Li Clan Patriarch, they flew forward, using their full strength to block the way. Booms echoed out, and the four northern reaches cultivators howled. However, they could do nothing to break through and had no way to interfere with Meng Hao. Meng Hao's body trembled visibly as it was continuously withered away and then restored. The severity of the pain was enough to cause all but the most strong-willed person to pass out. He gritted his teeth and continued on doggedly. However, then he looked over and saw Su Qing sitting there, shivering even more violently than before. Too slow, I need to go faster. He pushed his left hand down onto the ground. Rumble. Curse power surged madly toward his two hands, furiously pouring into his body. The grayness of the land was gradually fading away. This chapter was sponsored by Timu Jonsu, Michael Mikulczyk, Caleb Gleason, Kirkian Nathaniel Charles, Kevin Lamonti St. John, Anthony Ko, Remco Skimmel Abu, Michael Q, NG and Shan, and Joel F. Chapter 770, That Laughter. The ground quaked, and the gray color had faded by 10%. Up in midair, the four northern reaches Dao-seeking experts were in the midst of magical combat with Patriarch Song and the others. When they saw the color changing down below, they were astonished. 10%. Damn it, how could he be so inhuman? He used his own body as the vessel to absorb 10% of the curse power. Meng Hao trembled as the curse power filled him. His flesh and blood constantly withered, and his eternal stratum continuously restored him. Within a brief span, this cycle had already been repeated innumerable times. It was an even more brutal sight than what had occurred when Meng Hao stood outside the Blood Demon Sect's shield while fighting the four allied powers. Blood oozed constantly from the corners of his mouth, and even his eyes leaked black, viscous blood. His face was as pale as a corpse, yet his hands remained planted firmly on the ground. The Blood Demon Grand Magic spun rapidly as it sucked the curse power from the ground. His second true self was also trembling, as he used all the strength he could muster to raise the gravitational force of Meng Hao's Blood Demon Grand Magic to a shocking level. The entire island was surrounded by a gray whirlwind, which emitted shocking rumbling sounds as it rotated, covering the entire lake and spreading out into surrounding areas. The endless curse power that had spread off into the distance was gradually sucked into the Blood Demon Grand Magic, and then into Meng Hao's body. The pain that stabbed through him was impossible to describe, the cycle of withering and recovery like the most vicious torture imaginable. Soon, Meng Hao's hair could no longer be restored to black, it was gray, and turning whiter by the moment. Have to go even faster, thought Meng Hao. He gritted his teeth and then spat up a huge mouthful of blood. His body swayed back and forth, but his 10 fingers were firmly planted on the ground as he sucked in curse power at an incredible speed. 20%. 30%. The color of the curse was changing throughout the entire southern domain. In a short moment, Meng Hao seemed to have been reincarnated 100 times. It was almost like his body didn't belong to him anymore, only his will remained as steadfast as ever. Up in the sky, the 4 Dao-seeking experts from the northern reaches were completely astonished and couldn't help but gasp. They could scarcely believe what they were seeing. The fact that someone could do this, could use their own body to resist the Hellwither Nine Ruins curse and even absorb it, was beyond their imaginations. In fact, had any one of them been in that position, it would have been impossible for them to do the same. From their perspective, Meng Hao was taking a huge suicidal risk. Crazy? That guy's crazy. How could he not be crazy? Today is his wedding day, and now it's turned into a funeral. He'll die for sure. There's no way his body can take it. He'll turn into a pool of blood that will be an even more noxious curse. He's dead. As for the hundreds of thousands of cultivators who had come to participate in the wedding celebration, their bodies were still slowly withering. Although Meng Hao was frenziedly attempting to absorb the curse, as long as the curse was still there, everyone would still be under its effects. One face after another grew pale and aged. At the same time, Su Qing was trembling. She looked like a flower that would completely wilt at any moment. Meng Hao's heart was filled with a grief and indignation like a pent-up breath of frustration which could not be exhaled. It surged through his body and his eyes turned red. Within his mind, a single thought revolved. He had to do everything he could to absorb the entire curse. However, it was apparent that his body's ability to recover from the curse was slowly lessening. In fact, his skin was already beginning to shrivel and parch. His eternal stratum, even were it stronger than it already was, would be incapable of infinite recovery. There really isn't anything truly eternal in this world. Meng Hao thought as blood flowed out from his mouth. He knew this, and knew that his eternal stratum would be incapable of sustaining him in perpetuity. However, as before, he chose to continue to absorb the curse. Rumble. The color faded even more. 40%. Not much time had passed, and he had already absorbed 40% of the Hellwither Nine Ruins curse. As a result, he was filled with unspeakable pain. His teeth were loosening in his jaw and his skin was growing old. His bones were softening and blood oozed out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. And yet to Meng Hao, none of that mattered. He looked over at Su Qing and took a deep breath. There was a vast amount of curse power built up in him already, to the point that the eternal stratum couldn't dispel it. His vital organs were now beginning to wither and rot. At this point, Su Qing's eyelashes fluttered and she opened her eyes. She looked at Meng Hao and didn't have the energy to speak. However, anxiety, deep concern, and anguish could be seen in her eyes. It was an expression that broke Meng Hao's heart. The wedding ceremony had only been half completed. Now everything was gray and the color of blood. It should have been the happiest day of his life, but now it was turning into a tragedy. Meng Hao laughed. He lifted his head up to the sky and laughed. That laughter sounded maniacal, enraged, filled with intense discontent. Rumbling sounds could be heard from beneath his palms. His body was already nearly completely withered by the curse, and yet he continued to absorb it. Rumble. The ground changed color again. 50%. Boundless curse power rumbled toward him. Meng Hao was a black hole at the center of the windstorm, absorbing everything. Blood poured out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. His skin was tearing, and he was now sitting in the middle of a pool of blood. The accumulation of curse power within him was reaching a peak. The Hellwither Nine Ruins curse contained incredible powers of withering. It withered the land, and also caused the cultivation bases of all the cultivators born in that land to wither. Now, that power was building up inside of Meng Hao. The eternal stratum could not wipe it away, causing Meng Hao to tremble violently. It was at this point that Meng Hao suddenly made unexpected progress. After all, he cultivated the withering flame demon magic true self Dao. Within those 7 characters was the withering character. As of this moment, he gained complete enlightenment of withering. With the complete understanding of the withering character, Meng Hao's body rumbled and the curse power within him began to shrink. It condensed into his blood vessels, his soul, his flesh, and transformed into a withering character divine ability. At that moment, Meng Hao sucked in a deep breath as the withering character incantation combined with the blood immortal divine ability. In combination with the frenzied assistance of the second true self, massive rumbling sounds filled the air. 60%. The color of the curse throughout all the southern domain changed once again. Everything shook, and the four northern reaches peak Dao seeking experts up above were further shocked. His body is actually a Dao seeking. There's something strange about the technique he cultivates. This guy's body can constantly regenerate. He can actually absorb the withering power of the curse. The four men only continued to be more and more astonished. In fact, even Patriarch Song and the others could hardly believe what they were seeing. The only one who wasn't surprised was Pill Demon. He looked sadly at Meng Hao, as well as the lands below. He was Meng Hao's master, and he knew why Meng Hao was risking everything. Today was his wedding day, and his wife was on the same island he was. Unless he absorbs 100%, the effects can't be completely reversed, murmured Pill Demon. When Meng Hao absorbed 60% of the curse, the withering effect on the surrounding hundreds of thousands of cultivators was visibly reduced. Although they were still trembling, the effects of the curse seemed to have eased up a bit. When they opened their eyes, what they saw was Meng Hao, coughing up blood, his body slowly dissolving. 60% was not enough. Meng Hao produced the lightning cauldron and attempted to pour the curse power into it, but it didn't work. The lightning cauldron and the curse were two completely different things. He thought about using the wooden time swords to afflict the curse with the passage of time, but doing that would also affect the curse power in the bodies of the southern domain cultivators. Once the time power activated, it might end things, but it would also cause the destructive power of the curse to be inflicted faster. He thought of many other options, but none could resolve the problem. The only thing left to do was to continue to absorb the curse power. He once again sent the withering character incantation into operation. Once again the land rumbled, and the color changed. 70%. The withering character incantation was reaching its limit. With 70% of the curse power absorbed, even it was incapable of absorbing more. Meng Hao had truly reached his limit. His eternal stratum was on the verge of fading away. His body couldn't handle any more withering from the curse. He was ancient now. Tears rolled down Su Qing's face. The four peak Dao-seeking cultivators from the northern reaches had already been completely shaken by Meng Hao. However, now they could see that he had reached his limit, and they heaved sighs of relief. It's over, he's reached his limit, he can't absorb any more. He absorbed 70% of the curse power and yet didn't die. The power of withering even seems to exist within him. As far as I can tell, this guy is the #1 figure in the entire southern domain. To destroy the southern domain, we must first destroy him. Damnation! There's only 30% of the curse power remaining. Back on the island, Meng Hao saw the tears on Su Qing's face, and it seemed as if the entire world went completely silent. He looked at her, and his life force ignited. His cultivation base exploded with power. The mark on his hand that had appeared in the past appeared once again. He raised his head up and laughed. It was a shrill laughter that echoed out. Meng Hao was burning everything he had in one mad, desperate attempt to absorb more curse power. No, Su Qing cried weakly, trembling. The moment she cried out was the same moment that Meng Hao made his final, crazed attempt. The ground trembled and the color changed again, growing more faded. 80%. After 80% of the curse power entered his body, Meng Hao attempted to absorb all the way to 90. But then, his body trembled and he coughed up a huge mouthful of blood. Some sort of massive power pushed back against his palms and he was sent tumbling backward. Blood sprayed out. He was now incapable of absorbing any more curse power. Impossible, thought the four northern reaches peak Dao-seeking experts. Without Meng Hao to absorb it, the remaining 20% of the curse power suddenly exploded out to inundate the hundreds of thousands of cultivators. Their cultivation bases surged with all the power they could summon as they fought back. The result was, the curse power was reduced by another 10%. As of now, 90% of the curse power had been wiped away. Only 10% was left behind. That 10% seemed to erupt with unprecedented power. The hundreds of thousands of cultivators all coughed up blood. However, there was an intense, murderous look in the eyes of each and every one. To these cultivators, the remaining 10% of the curse power was no catastrophe. It was something they could bear. Furthermore, there was little weakening to their cultivation bases. One by one they stood up, and in their eyes was monstrous killing intent. In that moment, wild colors flashed in the sky and the clouds churned. The four peak Dao-seeking experts from the northern reaches felt their scalps going numb. They were completely shaken. It was only Su Qing, still clothed in her red wedding dress, who coughed up blood and continued to grow weaker. Because of her body's unique situation, even the 10% of the curse power that remained could be fatal to her. She suddenly began to topple over. Meng Hao, around whom swirled black wisps of death aura, immediately lurched forward and caught her in his arms. Filled with grief and rage, he carried her off into the distance, far from the raging war about to erupt. He had saved the entire southern domain, but couldn't save his wife. In his insanity, Meng Hao began to laugh with grief. Laughter that sounded like weeping echoed out across the lands. This chapter was sponsored by Isaac, Christopher Choi, Quang Tran Nasmal, Daniel Antoniuk, Pedro, Sven Salberg, Ralric Sumner, Cole Hosner, Martin Jensen, Hal Richard, Thomas Dixon, Dominic Sampson, Avijit Wadhawan, John Rufino Aguilar, Gryffindor, Kariye, Budisku Ionut, Dan Gabber, Thomas Potkany, Nils Mueller, Davis 1, Kenneth McCarty, Nish, Patrisku Gabai, David Geltema, Fiber Optic, Joseph, Andreas Selman, ONI /Ghost, and Arkin. Chapter 771, Let Me Rest a Bit. An incredible silence suddenly filled the entire battlefield. After that, killing intent exploded up into the heavens. Kill THEM. Hundreds of thousands of cultivators charged madly toward the Milky Way Sea, towards the hundreds of thousands of withering northern reaches cultivators. The wars had begun. Meng Hao left, and yet not a single southern domain cultivator felt even the slightest bit upset because of that. They had attended Meng Hao and Su Qing's wedding, as well as the invasion of the northern reaches. They had also experienced the Hellwither Nineruin's curse. The only thing they felt regarding Meng Hao was sorrow, as well as hope that he would eventually have the strength to continue on. A huge massacre unfolded on the border of the southern domain. // Meng Hao held Su Qing. Both were still wearing their red wedding garments. He held her in his arms and she leaned up against his chest. A dark aura surrounded Meng Hao, and his body was incredibly withered. Tears filled his eyes, and his heart was torn to pieces. He felt as if he was being continuously stabbed with countless sharp blades. A black aura also appeared on the withered Su Qing. She had already died once, and although her body had been restored, it was only meant to survive for 100 years. The remaining 10% power of the curse might not affect others very much, but to Su Qing, well, it was something her body couldn't handle. The remaining 10% of the curse power was like exponential time power. Within only a few days, she would live out an entire lifetime. Su Qing suddenly forced her eyes open to look at her husband as he held her. He was the most dear and important person in her entire life. Her voice weak, she said, "I want to go back to the valley." She didn't want Meng Hao to be unhappy, nor did she want to see him hurt even the smallest bit. She wanted to be happy with him forever, with no pain and no sadness. "No matter what, as long as you are safe and sound, then I'm content." "All right, let's go back," said Meng Hao with a nod. His heart trembled as he looked at her. He didn't want his grief to affect her, so a warm smile appeared on his face. Except it was a smile filled with silent tears. "You did the right thing," she murmured. "They came to attend our wedding and we shouldn't let the guests be harmed. We owe them now. In the future, if I'm not here, make sure to pay everyone back." With that, she sunk into his chest exhaustedly and closed her eyes. When she closed her eyes, Meng Hao stopped in place. After sensing that she was simply unconscious, he felt that he could finally unleash his grief. He looked up into the sky, and tears began to pour out. He didn't want to alarm Su Qing, so he held her very gently as they proceeded off into the distance. They passed over mountains and lands until they reached the Blood Demon sect, Blood Prince Gorge, and their log cabin. He went to seek advice from Patriarch Blood Demon, but the Immortal's cave was sealed with a blood-colored shield, preventing him from entering. Patriarch Blood Demon was asleep and incapable of awakening. Back in the valley, Meng Hao held Su Qing and his heart ached. Straightening her hair, he softly said, "We agreed to spend 100 years together. After that you would be reincarnated and I would go find you." Su Qing opened her eyes and smiled at him. What she didn't see was that, when he stroked his hand through her hair, it was filled with withered strands of hair that had fallen out. Meng Hao saw and he trembled. He quickly clenched his fingers, causing the hairs to vanish. Su Qing's face was pale. Her hair, like her life, was withering away. Her face was also slowly changing. She was no longer young and beautiful. Wrinkles were spreading out across her face. The flow of time affected her body in a way that made it seem as if many years had elapsed. As Meng Hao watched her pretty features growing older, he felt as if he didn't have a heart anymore. All he had was a feeling of emptiness, as if a painful black hole existed within his chest. Su Qing looked at the night sky and the twinkling stars. Her voice soft, she murmured, "I wish we could go back in time to the Reliance sect. I could be your elder sister in the sect and you could be my junior brother. I would take you to meet my family. I remember that before I was taken to the sect, I had a younger brother. I wish I could be with you forever." She was growing weaker. She closed her eyes and slept. Meng Hao could tell that Su Qing's life force was reaching its end. Her fleshly body was withered, and it seemed as if it might vanish at any moment. She had no energy left, like a candle in the wind. Su Qing was aging. She no longer appeared to be in her 20s, but rather middle-aged. However, to Meng Hao, she would eternally be that beautiful young woman to whom he had once given a cosmetic cultivation pill. "I won't let you wither away," he said softly. "We agreed to spend 100 years together, and we will." Eyes filling with a flame of unprecedented decisiveness, he reached down to stroke her cheek. After a long moment, he closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them and extended his right index finger. From the look of it, it was now the only part of his body that hadn't been affected by the withering. That was because it contained what little remained of his eternal stratum. He carefully sliced a cut into his finger and slowly squeezed out a few drops of blood onto Su Qing's lips, blood which contained his eternal stratum. Her lips turned the color of blood, and it almost seemed they were the only part of her body that had any color. It formed a stark contrast to her ashen skin. As the blood seeped into her mouth, her face suddenly wasn't old anymore. Meng Hao, on the other hand, trembled, and his body withered up a bit more. His eternal stratum was now weakened, but in his heart he felt hope. However, after 3 days passed, Meng Hao realized that his eternal stratum could not prevent Su Qing from withering. Finally, he started laughing bitterly. Su Qing's hair was now mostly white and her face looked middle-aged. She was skinny and no longer beautiful like she used to be. However, the warmth in her eyes and the curve of her smile were things that Meng Hao would never forget. Finally, she smiled and prevented Meng Hao from using any more of his eternal stratum blood. It hurt her heart to see him doing such a thing, even more so than the thought of her imminent death. "Just stay with me," she said. "Until the end, take me to be reincarnated. That's good enough. We agreed to a whole lifetime, so it's just like, I'm going to sleep for a bit. When I wake up, I'll see you there, right?" "Absolutely," said Meng Hao, his voice quavering. Days passed and Su Qing grew older. The time she remained awake every day lessened. Most of the time she slept. Meng Hao stayed by her side and didn't take even half a step outside of the valley. He held her the entire time, held her in a way that said he never wanted to let her go. As for his own body, as the days passed, the eternal stratum gradually awoke and began to restore him. Even as the curse power was slowly expelled from within, Su Qing continued to grow weaker. Meng Hao tried every method possible to reverse the fading of Su Qing's life force, all to no avail. He hated that his cultivation base wasn't high enough, and even more so, he hated the cruelty of the Northern Reaches curse. His heart was already devilish, but he had been suppressing it almost as if with shackles. But now, the shackles began to loosen. He could do nothing but watch over Su Qing. He watched as her hair turned white and her youth disappeared. She went from being middle-aged to being elderly. Although he could have changed her out of the red wedding dress, he didn't, and she still wore it. At one point she forced her eyes open to look at him, but they were cloudy, and she couldn't see him clearly. "Chu Yuyan is a good girl," she murmured. "I told her that I can only stay with you for 100 years, and that she should help me take care of you. Songjia isn't bad either." Meng Hao didn't say anything. He looked at her, his eyes filled with grief as he slowly caressed her wrinkled face. What he saw was her former beautiful face that had changed in only a few days as he held her. By now, the devil in Meng Hao's heart was unshackled and awakening. In those few days that passed, great changes occurred outside in the southern domain. In the battle on the shore of the Milky Way Sea, the hundreds of thousands of Northern Reaches cultivators all died. The Milky Way Sea was stained red with blood. Then the second wave of the Northern Reaches forces arrived. The hundreds of thousands of Southern Domain cultivators began to retreat. The battlefield grew from the border of the Southern Domain to engulf fully half of the entire continent. Fierce fighting raged every day. Among the hundreds of thousands of Northern Reaches cultivators were 7 Dao-seeking experts, which made it virtually impossible for the Southern Domain to hold their ground. They were constantly forced into retreat. All of the Southern Domain's cultivators were mobilized. It didn't matter the sect or clan, everyone was called into action for this war of life or death. It was without a doubt a fight to the death. The Northern Reaches invasion was not one in which surrender was sought. They wanted the complete annihilation of the Southern Domain cultivators' foundation. Furthermore, because of the casualties suffered by the initial wave of attackers, the Northern Reaches cultivators harbored an even more intense and deep-seated hatred for the Southern Domain than they had in the beginning. No one would rest until the other side was dead. Sects were laid to waste, and one clan after another was left in ruins. Eventually, the war focused on 6 different fronts. It was as if 6 mighty arrows had been shot from the Northern Reaches directly into the Southern Domain. The third and fourth fronts eventually overlapped and became the location of the largest concentration of cultivators. Hundreds of thousands of Southern Domain cultivators were there, as was the main force of the Northern Reaches army. The carnage was never-ending, and the Southern Domain was in a state of constant retreat. Severe casualties were inflicted every day, and bloody paths strewn with corpses stretched across the land. Several days later, over half of the hundreds of thousands of Southern Domain cultivators in the third and fourth fronts were dead. The remaining 200,000 were now falling back to the Blood Demon sect. A final line of defense was being set up outside the Blood Demon sect to resist the Northern Reaches' murderous assault. Rumbling filled the battlefield, along with miserable screams and the sound of fierce combat. The colorful lights of divine abilities filled the air, and the ground quaked. Northern Reaches had come with giants the size of mountains, who wielded enormous wolf-tooth clubs. They charged onto the battlefield in the vanguard, and even when their bodies had been covered with bloody wounds, they continued their awful massacre. Then there were the countless wild beasts and innumerable evil spirits that accompanied the hundreds of thousands of Northern Reaches cultivators. They were a powerful force of destruction that crushed everything in their path. Chapter 772. No regret regarding the grand wedding. The chaotic sounds of battle drifted into the Blood Demon sect. All the remaining Blood Demon sect disciples were outside, alongside the other Southern Domain cultivators, defending against the advancing Northern Reaches army. The Southern Domain cultivators had no choice but to fall back to the Blood Demon sect. As the Northern Reaches army advanced, this location had become something of a holy land for the Southern Domain. The Blood Demon sect was the most powerful sect in the Southern Domain. The Blood Demon sect had Meng Hao, who had saved the entire Southern Domain from the curse. The Blood Demon sect also had the legendary, incredibly powerful Patriarch Blood Demon. Therefore, that was the location the forces from the third and fourth fronts retreated to. The Northern Reaches cultivators were happy to see this. They wanted to destroy the foundation of the Southern Domain. If they could take out the Blood Demon sect, then they would be able to deliver the coup de grace to the Southern Domain cultivators in one fell swoop. The other fronts throughout the Southern Domain were also changing locations, getting closer to the Blood Demon sect. From the look of things, they wanted to make the Blood Demon sect the location of their final stand. The Southern Domain did not seem to have any hope of winning. By now, the Northern Reaches had mobilized the third wave of their army, which would arrive in only a few days from the Milky Way Sea. That third wave army represented the ultimate power of the Northern Reaches. Constant carnage could be witnessed in the area surrounding the Blood Demon sect. Pill Demon, Patriarch Song, and in fact, all of the peak Dao-seeking experts in the Southern Domain were there at what was essentially the primary battlefield of the war. They had been fighting and killing for so long that their eyes were completely bloodshot. Patriarch Song had lost his right arm, as well as an eye. His aura was weak, and he had even been forced to start burning his life force. Sun Tao from the Violet Fate sect had lost his fleshly body, and was now nothing more than a nascent divinity. However, he was surrounded by swirling pill furnaces, and continued to fight nonetheless. Patriarch Golden Frost was severely injured. As the battle had progressed, he had recovered some of his senses, and was no longer muddle-headed and ignorant. In the moment when he became lucid, he did not flee, but rather began to laugh bitterly. "I have sinned," he roared, "sinned against the Southern Domain." With that, he began to fight even more frenziedly than before. The third Li clan patriarch did not recover his senses. He died fighting. His death shook the entire battlefield. He was at the peak of Dao seeking, and in the end, opted to self-detonate. Although he wasn't able to kill any of the peak Dao-seeking experts from the northern domain, he did manage to severely injure 3 of them. Pill Demon was completely exhausted and also injured. At some point, a violet mark had come to appear on his forehead. Apparently, it was something that had previously been sealed, but now, he was experimentally unleashing it. When the mark appeared, his cultivation base left the early Dao-seeking stage, passed through the middle stage and ended by emanating the power of the late Dao-seeking stage. It was as if terrifying waves had been unleashed inside of him that rolled around constantly in an attempt to break out. Even more spirit-severing experts died. The northern reaches suffered similarly large casualties. The war unfolded rapidly, and in a short period of time, rivers of blood flowed everywhere. As the sound of battle and slaughter rumbled from the outside world into Blood Prince Gorge, Meng Hao sat there holding Su Qing, watching her gradually grow older and older. More wrinkles covered her face, and her hair was now completely white. Finally, the pain in his heart seemed to form a resonance with the fighting and killing going on outside. There was no way for him to keep Su Qing's life force from slipping away. There was nothing he could do but watch as her beauty slowly faded. There was no sparkle or reflection in her cloudy eyes when she opened them. Her whole world had become blurry. "After I'm gone, will you miss me?" she asked. When Meng Hao heard this, more tears welled up in his eyes and stabbing pain filled his heart. He held her tight, and his tears dropped down onto her face. "Don't cry," she murmured, using what scant energy she had left to raise a withered hand and try to wipe his face dry. "I'm happy that I ran into you that day on Mount Daqing. I hope that after I'm reincarnated and then regain my memories, it will be on another Mount Daqing with you. Meng Hao, I've been dreaming a lot recently. I always dream that we are back on Mount Daqing or in the Reliance sect." As she spoke, the flame of her life force began to slowly fade away. By now, she was fully conscious. Clearly, this was the last bit of lucidity she would experience before death, the last burst of life force. Her eyes were not clouded now, but clear, filled with warmth as she recalled past times, and also brimming with an intense reluctance to leave. She didn't want to leave the lands of the southern domain or Meng Hao. Too many things kept her here, too many memories she didn't want to part with. She wanted to stay with Meng Hao for the rest of the 100 years. Unfortunately, that was now impossible. She sighed, and deep in her heart she felt regret that the wedding ceremony was only half completed. "Meng Hao, take care of yourself. You live, I live. You die, I die. When the day arrives that I recover my memories after being reincarnated, you need to be there. If you're not, then I don't ever want to wake up from the darkness of being unaware." The light that flickered in her eyes was gradually fading. The hand she had lifted up moments ago grew so weak that it fell back down. In the moment that it began to fall, Meng Hao reached out to take hold of it. Deep in his eyes, grief mixed with warmth as he looked at Su Qing. He placed his right hand onto her back and poured more of his own life force into her. In that moment, his hair turned completely white. The simple act bolstered her fading life force just a little bit, allowing her to stay alive in the world just a little bit longer. She could breathe a bit more of that air she didn't wish to part with, and her eyes glowed with just a little bit more light as she looked at Meng Hao. "Let me go, okay?" she murmured weakly. Meng Hao's eyes glowed with determination. "Our wedding hasn't been finished," he said, "so you can't go yet. I'm going to give you a complete cultivator bonding ceremony." With that, he held her tight and flew up into the air. He dared not loosen his grip on her. It was his flow of life force that was preventing her from fading away. They were still wearing their red wedding gowns and both had snow-white hair. They were old. It was as if great rejoicing and great calamity were fused together as Meng Hao flew out of Blood Prince Gorge. Off in the distance, he could see the shocking battle underway. Hundreds of thousands of cultivators fought like mad. The ripples cast off by magical techniques flowed out in all directions. Bright colors flashed in the sky, and the clouds churned chaotically. Booms and explosions accompanied death and destruction. At any given moment, miserable screams could be heard drifting across the battlefield. They turned into waves of sound that resembled the yellow springs of the underworld. The sky above and the land below seemed to have become the color of blood, filled with endless corpses. It was evening, but the shattered air and swirling tempests caused the sky to look as dark as night. When Meng Hao appeared, it instantly attracted quite a bit of attention. The powerful experts of both the southern domain and the northern reaches saw the old man carrying the white-haired old woman, both of whom were clad in red wedding attire. They could also sense the profound mixture of calmness and grief that radiated out of the man. When the southern domain cultivators saw him, they couldn't help but feel bitter and pained. Meng Hao, it's the exalted Meng Hao. Don't tell me, is that Su Qing in his arms, that cursed power is. I was there at the wedding ceremony. I've never seen a more spectacular sight in my whole life. Patriarch Song looked at Meng Hao, and it seemed like he wanted to say something. In the end, he didn't. He could sense the profound pain in Meng Hao, the kind that was like losing your own heart. The awoken patriarch Golden Frost also remained silent. Sun Tao had nothing left but a nascent divinity. He looked at Meng Hao from some distance off, then turned and continued to fight. Pill Demon's expression was one of sorrow. He saw his apprentice and couldn't help but think about how the wedding ceremony had turned into this current situation. Great rejoicing had turned into great sorrow. He wasn't sure what he should say. Virtually none of the Northern Reaches cultivators recognized Meng Hao at first. However, once they saw his clothes and the white hair, as well as the agonized expressions of the Southern Domain cultivators, they thought of a name that had already become legendary among the Northern Reaches cultivators. Meng Hao, it's definitely that damnable Meng Hao. Yeah, that's him. He infected the entire first wave of the army with the Hellwither Nine Ruins. Hundreds of thousands of cultivators massacred. The Milky Way Sea turned red with blood. Our Northern Reaches forces invaded the Southern Domain on the day of his wedding. What bad luck for him. His wedding day turned into a day of death and sorrow. Well, he deserves it. Now that he's shown his face again, he'll die for sure. It's actually a good thing for him. They can go to the underworld together, a happily married pair of dead souls. The Northern Reaches Peak Dao-seeking experts were among the forces currently abuzz with surprise. All of them were hurt, especially the three who were seriously injured by the third Li clan patriarch's death. Among those three, one was the man dressed in animal skins, and another was the young boy, both of whom were from the First Wave Army. The third was an old woman from the Second Wave Army. That's the Meng Hao that the Southern Domain cultivators always talk about, said the man in animal skin garments, frowning. He absorbed 80% of the curse power and still didn't die. He could be considered the archenemy of the Northern Reaches, said the boy through clenched teeth. His eyes burned with killing intent. If he had died, it would have been lucky for him. Since he's not dead, then I'm going to turn him into mincemeat today. Actually, it's good that he's still alive. Let him wallow in the feeling of withering up with his beloved on his wedding day. Let him be immersed in the sensation of growing old. Let his pain be a sacrifice to put to rest the souls of the hundreds of thousands of Northern Reaches heroes who died because of him. Next to the three wounded Peak Dao-seeking experts were several Northern Reaches patriarchs. They had long since heard the name of Meng Hao, and now that they laid eyes on him personally, their killing intent spread everywhere. Countless eyes across the battlefield were fixed on Meng Hao. His expression was one of grief as he looked at the aged, white-haired Su Qing. Finally, he looked up, and his gaze came to fall upon his master, Pill Demon. "Master," he said, "I want to finish the wedding ceremony here and now. Master, could you please continue to bear witness to the marriage?" Although his words were calm, that calmness contained something that caused the spirits of all the Southern Domain cultivators to be completely shaken. Su Qing's eyes were fixed on Meng Hao. She fought with all her power to prevent them from closing, and as she did, scintillating teardrops welled up inside and then seeped out down her cheeks. A tremor ran through Pill Demon. At the same time, the eyes of the Southern Domain cultivators began to glow with red light. The Blood Prince's grand wedding ceremony will continue. Blood Prince, I couldn't prepare a wedding gift for you, so let me kill some Northern Reaches cultivators for you. Their heads can be my wedding gift, and their blood my means of congratulating you. Exalted Meng Hao, let the wedding ceremony continue. The sorrow in the hearts of the Southern Domain cultivators transformed into a massive roar that echoed out across the battlefield. Immediately, Blood Demon sect disciples flew out to create an area decorated with lanterns and banners. It only took a moment for the place to look like a joyous and happy wedding was taking place there. The battlefield now seemed to be completely split in two. On one side was blood and slaughter. On the other side was Meng Hao's wedding. Expand. To hold a wedding ceremony in the middle of a battle was something that had never happened in the Southern Domain. As the Southern Domain cultivators roared with grief and rage, Pill Demon hovered in midair, looking at Meng Hao and the white-haired Su Qing. Pill Demon's heart trembled. "I will absolutely continue to bear witness for you and Su Qing," he said, his voice ancient and his heart filled with grief. His voice echoed out across the battlefield, prompting a roar of response from the southern domain cultivators. The hundreds of thousands of northern reaches cultivators were shocked by the scene playing out in front of them. As for their 7 peak Dao-seeking experts, their eyes flickered with killing intent. The first half was a red wedding. Therefore, let's make the last half even more red with blood. Northern reaches cultivators, eradicate all of the southern domain cultivators, stain the ground red with blood, fill the place with discarnate souls, soak this red wedding with blood, charge. In response to the words of the peak Dao-seeking experts, the hundreds of thousands of northern reaches cultivators killing intent rocketed up. Roaring, they charged forward. Cultivation. The carnage once again continued. The ground shook and the air rippled with distortions. The battle between the southern domain and the northern reaches was like an enormous grindstone. Every time the two sides clashed, miserable screams would ring out. Every time they slammed into each other, blood and gore would spray in the air and discarnate souls would cry out in misery. The southern domain cultivators had gone mad, and their hearts surged with righteous ardor. We've come this far, now the time has come to die in battle, fight. The southern domain is my home while I live, and the southern domain shall be my haunt when I die. The wedding will blossom like a flower in the heart of bloody battle. How grand! Present the blood and heads of the northern reaches cultivators as wedding gifts. Kill Them. Deadly combat filled the battlefield. For the blood demon sect disciples, the mountains were the wedding candles and the land below was the wedding veil. With the wave of a few hands, a palace rose up, beautiful and grand, with lanterns and streamers. The palace appeared to display the facade of a happy wedding. Everyone was smiling, except within their smiles could be seen deep grief. Meng Hao held Su Qing, and she rested her head against his chest to look out at the scene. She could hear his heart beating and could feel her own connection to the world. She looked up at Meng Hao as if she were trying to burn his image into her very soul in such a way that reincarnation would be incapable of wiping it away. The river of forgetfulness would be incapable of washing it clean, and not even the tea of old Lady Meng could make her forget. Popping sounds could be heard as magical techniques and divine abilities were employed to create what looked like fireworks. Beautiful colors filled the land and sky. The sight was beautiful to behold. The new bride and groom were a huge contrast to the battle around them. Meng Hao's white hair floated around him as he held Su Qing in his arms and poured life force into her. Su Qing's hair was also white, and her face was covered with wrinkles. However, it also seemed to glow with a certain purity and holiness. Even as an old woman, she could continue to smile despite the fact that her beauty had faded away. Meng Hao was also smiling, and yet the grief in his heart continued to grow more and more profound. As of now, the only thing he could do was look deeply into her eyes. He knew that if he loosened his hand, she would fade away. She would part from the world of the living and find her way to reincarnation. Kill Them, roared the 7 peak Dao-seeking experts as they charged down from above. Patriarch Song's expression was one of grief as he roared and shot to meet them. Sun Tao's nascent soul and Patriarch Golden Frost joined him, along with Meng Hao's second true self. Booms echoed out as 4 people completely blocked the way of 7. Bitter fighting continued all around. Roars filled the air along with blood-curdling screams. Both northern reaches cultivators and southern domain cultivators were fighting with madness, killing everything that moved. The ground trembled as the fighting raged like wildfire. Nearby, it was visible to everyone that the wedding ceremony was officially commencing. Pill Demon flew into the air to hover in front of Meng Hao and Su Qing. He looked at Meng Hao, and he looked at Su Qing, whom he held in his arms. Despite the fact that Pill Demon's heart felt like it was being ripped apart, his lips couldn't help curving into a gentle smile. Meng Hao held Su Qing as he looked at Pill Demon. "Master, make the declaration okay," he said. The ground was trembling, but there was still a significant number of cultivators in the area who dropped to their knees to kowtow. It was a spontaneous action on their part, their way of thanking Meng Hao for absorbing the curse and saving their lives. Such kowtows were kowtows that came directly from the heart. From far up above the battlefield, it could clearly be seen that, shockingly, the entire place had been split into 2 areas. In one area, the wedding ceremony was being carried out. In the other, it was complete carnage. Those present who had attended the first half of Meng Hao's wedding ceremony were now participating in the second half, and they would by no means retreat. It didn't matter if the wedding was stained blood red or turned ash gray. It would be finished. This was Meng Hao's choice, and also the way for the southern domain cultivators to repay him. Meng Hao and Su Qing's wedding would not be a wedding of regret. The Coutwing cultivators were spattered with blood. Some was the blood of enemies, some was their own blood. As for their exhaustion, they hid it inside. As for their grief, they bottled it up in their hearts. The only thing that could be seen were the smiles on their faces. These smiles were like brilliant sunlight that caused the entire battlefield to be shaken. Pildemon's heart was trembling as his ancient voice, once again, rang out to cover the entire battlefield. I declare that henceforth, the 7 peak Dao-seeking cultivators from the northern reaches fought with increasing ferocity. The hundreds of thousands of northern reaches cultivators down below bellowed with rage as they charged in wave after wave of attack. Henceforth, Meng Hao and Su Qing are bonded cultivators. Their hands are bound by destiny for all time. Whether they live or die, that connection will never be broken. His voice echoed from one end of the battlefield to the other. Su Qing, nestled in Meng Hao's arms, heard the words and her face flushed. She smiled shyly. A wedding is the most important day in a person's life, and to a woman it is a day when dreams come true. She and Meng Hao were now husband and wife. Heaven and earth bore witness, as did the hundreds of thousands of cultivators from both the southern domain and the northern reaches. Demon officiated, and the ceremony was held under the vast canopy of the sky. Discarnate souls were present to bear witness, and the entire scene was as red as blood. Together all bore witness to the fact that they were married. Our hands are bound by destiny for all time, murmured Su Qing, gazing at Meng Hao. Whether we live or die, that connection will never be broken. Tears poured out of her eyes to disappear in the wrinkles that covered her cheeks. Our hands are bound by destiny for all time, repeated Meng Hao, looking into her eyes. Whether we live or die, that connection will never be broken. The ground shook, and the Coutwing cultivators in the area looked up. Then they joined their voices together in a cry that sent out shocking sound waves. Meng Hao and Su Qing, their hands are bound by destiny for all time. Whether they live or die, that connection will never be broken. The sound echoed across a battlefield that reeked of blood and gore. Amidst the carnage, a southern domain cultivator dashed forward, grabbed the severed head of a northern reaches cultivator, and held it high into the air. In the blink of an eye, chaotic fighting erupted out as the southern domain cultivators let out unprecedented roars of rage and went berserk. They seemed to be trying to outdo each other as they offered up one wedding gift after another. Fellow Taoist Meng, this is my wedding gift to you. Exalted Meng Hao, this is my wedding gift. This is mine. Ha ha ha, who dares to fight me over this severed head? This is my wedding gift for the Blood Prince. The sudden counteroffensive caused the hundreds of thousands of northern reaches cultivators to tremble in their hearts. For the first time, they actually fell back under the attack. They've gone crazy. It's just some wedding, but it's pushed them into insanity. Insane, completely insane wedding gifts. Damn it, they're turning us northern reaches cultivators into wedding gifts. As such comments echoed across the battlefield, Meng Hao stood in the temple, holding Su Qing. He didn't want the grief he felt to show on his face. However, by this point, the grief had completely inundated his heart. It was reaching the point where suppressing the devil in his heart was virtually impossible. He held tight to Su Qing, unwilling to release his grip on her. Su Qing smiled, and to Meng Hao it was the most beautiful smile to ever exist in the world. When he saw her smile, what he saw was not her age and her white hair. He didn't care about any of that. All he cared about was Su Qing herself. Take me to enter the cycle of reincarnation, she said softly. Now that we are husband and wife, I have no regrets. Let me go. Let me leave, please. Meng Hao's eyes were shot with blood. Su Qing's hand trembled as she reached up to stroke his cheek. As she murmured these things to Meng Hao, her eyes suddenly flashed with a final, brilliant radiance like that of a sunset. She had severed her own arteries. She did not wish to see Meng Hao continue to deliver his life force to her, to give her a little bit of extra time at the cost of his own vitality. It pained her, and she did not want him to receive injury. She did not want to see any more white hairs on his head because of her. Kinger. A tremor ran through Meng Hao. Su Qing looked at him one final time. A smile appeared on her lips, and it was the same smile that had appeared when she saw him for the first time, leaning out over the cliff on Mount Daqing. Of course, Meng Hao had never seen that smile. A final tear rolled out of the corner of her eye. In that exact moment, her body dissipated, transformed into motes of glittering light. There was no body for the teardrop to fall onto, so it fell down onto the ground. "You're my wife," murmured Meng Hao. "The heavens, the earth, none of it matters. No matter how long it takes, let the cycle of reincarnation bear witness. No one will take you away from me. When you are born again, I will find you." He tried to keep a hold of her, but the only thing that remained was motes of light. Inside of him, the pressure weighing down on his heart transformed into a roar. The battlefield suddenly went silent. In that moment, all gazes fell upon Meng Hao, whether they were from the southern domain or the northern reaches. They saw Su Qing transform into motes of light that turned into a river which flowed up into the sky. Chapter 773. Su Qing enters reincarnation. This chapter was sponsored by Ramit Batty, Roderick Cinnamon, Joris Middendorp, and Daniel Ragel. /expand. The motes of light turned into a long river. In the darkness of the sky, the river of light was resplendent and glittering as it swept higher and higher. A vast vortex suddenly appeared up above, rotating silently. It was as if the sky itself was being split open to reveal the starry sky above it. There, out in the stars, another river was visible, vast, mighty, and incomparably boundless. The water of the river seemed withered and yellow and was filled with innumerable, discarnate souls. The cultivators down below were shocked. The River of Forgetfulness. 1. Although the river Lethe from Greek mythology is also known as the River of Forgetfulness, this is a different river, one that comes from Chinese mythology. I couldn't find much information about it in English, so I translated the summary from the Bajupedia article about the River of Forgetfulness. This is information about the mythological river, not necessarily the river as portrayed in ISSTH. In Chinese mythology, after people die, they pass through the gates of hell and travel the path of the Yellow Springs to the underworld. Between the Yellow Springs and the underworld itself is the River of Forgetfulness. The water of the river appears to be both yellow and blood red. Within the river are countless wandering souls and wild ghosts that cannot be reincarnated, as well as endless bugs and vermin. The stench from the river buffets your face like a wind. Running over the river is the Bridge of Helplessness, beside which sits an old woman who is Old Lady Meng. To cross the River of Forgetfulness, you must drink the tea of Old Lady Meng. If you don't drink the tea, you can't cross the Bridge of Helplessness, which means that you cannot be reincarnated. Heavens, that's the legendary River of Forgetfulness. What the people down below could see was only one small portion of the river that flowed through the starry sky, visible through the vortex. Su Qing, now a collection of light motes, was just about to flow through the vortex and merge into the River of Forgetfulness, then be swept away to the underworld of the fourth mountain. Meng Hao hovered in midair, staring blankly at the scene. Tears streamed down his face, and his heart was racked with stabbing pain. Up above, the motes of light seemed to form the outline of a face as they entered into the vortex. It was Su Qing's face. It looked just like the face that Meng Hao saw underneath the moonlight in the Reliance sect. His heart quivered. Su Qing's face seemed to be smiling at him. She looked at him for a moment, then turned and once again turned into a flowing river that flowed up toward the vortex. Among the 7-peaked Dao-seeking experts from the northern reaches, the young boy in the red robe had an evil glint in his eye. His body flickered as he shot directly toward the motes of light. His voice was high-pitched as he cried out, "Want to enter the cycle of reincarnation? You're dreaming. If you're gonna die, your soul is going to disperse into nothing." When Meng Hao saw the boy closing in on the motes of light that were Su Qing, he began to tremble. A devilishness, along with a desire to kill, exploded out in his heart, both impossible to suppress. In the same moment, just when the red-robed boy was about to reach the motes of light, he let out a miserable shriek. A mysterious power enveloped him, and he was sent tumbling backward, blood spraying from his mouth. He looked up at the vortex with shock in his eyes. He had already been seriously injured in battle earlier when the third Li clan patriarch self-detonated. Without an incredibly powerful cultivation base to support him, he would have long since died. Right now, the power that swept out from within the vortex was filled with a shocking aura, something that left him frightened out of his mind. Furthermore, it seemed to only be a warning. The vortex continued to spin as Su Qing disappeared inside and merged into the great river. She was now one of many souls floating along in the waters. However, there was something different about Su Qing's soul. She had a red glow surrounding her, protecting her, making it so that none of the other discarnate souls could even get near her. All was quiet around her, as she drifted in the river water, far off into the distance. The vortex vanished, and the sky returned to its normal state. Meng Hao was silent. The temple vanished and the candles were extinguished. The lantern and banners transformed into ash, and the happy atmosphere disappeared. The only thing that remained was a battlefield. Meng Hao slowly descended to the ground. He looked down at his hands, and for a moment it almost felt as if he were still holding Su Qing. Except, she was no more. "Gone," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "We made an agreement to spend 100 years together, but now you're gone." His face twisted, and his white hair began to rise up as an intense murderous aura rose up. The murderous aura grew more intense. In the blink of an eye, it was an inferno, a black mist that rolled around him. Everything around him froze, and an aura of death spread out. The black mist rose up to turn into an enormous face up in midair. The face was none other than Meng Hao's face. His eyes were no longer red, but black with no pupils. It was as if he could see nothing but infinite blackness. As he stood there, he lifted his head up and began to laugh bitterly. When the laughter entered the ears of the northern reaches cultivators, their hearts began to tremble and their souls shivered. Suddenly, cracking sounds filled Meng Hao's body, although only he could hear them. It was the sound of shackles breaking. Within him, a devil was being unleashed, something that had existed within him since the events in the Milky Way Sea. He no longer wished to control it or to suppress it. He only had one desire: to kill each and every cultivator from the northern reaches who had invaded the southern domain, to kill each and every peak Tao-seeking expert. Kill them all. He would pay any price to be able to do that. If he couldn't become an immortal, then what was the harm in becoming a devil? As he laughed bitterly, his body rumbled and black mist poured out of him. His hair was now completely white, but his features were no longer withered. His youth was restored and his face was shockingly icy. He looked like a bloodthirsty devil that could only see blood and killing. Cracking sounds rose up from the ground as blood-colored ice spread out in all directions. Intense coldness spread around him, as if the seasons were suddenly changing. Black snowflakes began to flutter through the air. Meng Hao had thoroughly unleashed the devil within him, and he had removed any suppression of his desire to slaughter. He was now completely grim and cold, not just to his enemies, but even to himself. His wedding day had been turned into a tragedy, and the only thing he could do now was become a devil. In the instant that his inner devil was unleashed, the blood demon grand magic finally began to move away from the fourth level toward the fifth. Meng Hao's gaze looked out into the sky toward the red-robed boy. "You," he said, "you shall die." Instantly, his second true self looked over with flickering eyes. At the same time, Meng Hao vanished, then shockingly reappeared up in midair. His body was wreathed in seething black mist and devil flames. Along with his second true self, he shot toward the red-robed boy. "Your clone is pretty tough," said the boy with a snort, "but your true self, screw off." In unison with his words, the fighting on the battlefield broke out once again. Whether it was the peak Tao-seeking experts up above or the madness of the close-quarter combat of the southern domain and northern reaches down below, the battling was intense. This was far beyond the fighting which had taken place outside of the blood demon sect in the initial war. Meng Hao's second true self shot toward the red-robed boy at high speed. As soon as they met, winds blasted out and lightning boomed. Explosion after explosion rang out as, within a short period of time, they exchanged thousands of moves. As for Meng Hao, as soon as he flew out, the old man in animal hide clothing moved to intercept him. Grinning viciously, he punched out violently toward Meng Hao. "Your beloved is dead. What's the point in continuing to live? Why don't you go join her?" As the fist descended toward him, Meng Hao looked at it coldly. He lifted his right hand, and the lightning cauldron appeared, causing the old man's face to instantly flicker. It was then that lightning poured out from within the cauldron to surround Meng Hao. Brilliant light was cast out onto the battlefield, and then he suddenly vanished. So did the old man. Their positions had been reversed. When Meng Hao appeared in the spot previously occupied by the old man in animal hide clothing, he didn't even turn to look back. Even as the old man roared in fury and shot in pursuit, Meng Hao proceeded forward. He had one target, the red-robed boy. It was that boy's cinnabar fruit that had cursed Su Qing. Furthermore, he had just attempted to interfere with Su Qing, entering the cycle of reincarnation. Meng Hao was like a devil in his determination to slay him. The red-robed boy was currently fighting Meng Hao's second true self. He had already been seriously injured and as such was not a match for the second true self. He continued to fall back in retreat, his eyes bloodshot as he attacked with reckless abandon. When he saw Meng Hao bearing down on him, he pointed out with a finger. Trying to get yourself killed on purpose. Fine, I'll kill your true self. In the instant that the boy pointed out, Meng Hao used the lightning cauldron again. There was a flicker, and he switched places with his second true self. A boom rang out as his second true self appeared in the spot he had just occupied. As for Meng Hao, he was now closer to the boy than anyone else on the battlefield. Meng Hao's use of the lightning cauldron had reached the acme of perfection. The red-robed boy's mind trembled. His finger attack just now was incapable of doing anything to Meng Hao's second true self. He jerked around and was about to make a deadly attack against Meng Hao, when suddenly Meng Hao waved his hand. Shockingly, a magical symbol appeared in his hand. It was a single character. Wither. This was the withering character incantation which had appeared after he absorbed 80% of the curse power. The incantation could be used as a divine ability that could be continuously maintained for a long period of time. As Meng Hao's cultivation base grew higher, the withering power of the magic would grow more consummate, its might more and more terrifying. However, he could also focus its energies into a single, instant attack. This would deplete the magical symbol and cause it to dim, requiring it to recharge and absorb more withering energy before it could be used again. I haven't personally killed a peak Dao-seeking cultivator before, said Meng Hao quietly. You're going to be the first. The pain that my wife felt before she died is now something that you will have the pleasure of experiencing. Meng Hao's voice was calm in a way that caused the red-robed boy's heart to pound. A profound sense of deadly crisis appeared inside of him. The withering character caused the red-robed boy to begin to pant. His scalp went numb, and he instantly tried to flee. At the same time, Meng Hao, his eyes cold, coolly said, "Withering character blast." As soon as the words left his mouth, blinding gray light shot out from the palm of his hand. It immediately filled the sky, causing the hundreds of thousands of cultivators down below to look up in astonishment. They could sense the withering curse power exploding out up above. The old man in animal hide clothing gasped, then immediately began to back up. "No!" screamed the red-robed youth. Cultivation base power exploded out, and he produced massive quantities of magical items to try to fight back against the power of his own Hellwither Nine Ruins curse. However, no matter what he did, when it came to the explosive withering power, he was like a praying mantis trying to block an army. In the blink of an eye, he was inundated by the grayness. The only thing that remained behind was a blood-curdling scream that echoed out across the land. Chapter 774, Dao Seeking Felled. Chapter 775, Fight. The withering character incantation had absorbed 80% of the Hellwither Nine Ruins curse power. It was the most powerful magical symbol he possessed, and when its power erupted with the curse, it could slay the peak of Dao Seeking. Meng Hao was well aware of this fact. However, it would only work once, after which the magical symbol would grow dark. Meng Hao had decided to use that one sure kill on the red-robed boy. Grayness filled the world, and the red-robed boy screamed miserably. Everyone could hear it, and they were completely shaken and astonished. It was just possible to see the red-robed boy within the grayness of the curse. His robes were in tatters, his hair was white and falling out of his head. His skin dried up, his flesh, blood, bones, organs, and soul were all withering away. Seeing the boy screaming miserably, Meng Hao calmly asked, "Does it hurt? Kinger didn't want me to see her pain over these past few days. She endured it. Can you imagine how a fragile girl like her was able to endure such shocking pain?" Everyone on the battlefield could hear his words, and it caused an intense coldness to well up in their hearts. "I've also experienced such pain," Meng Hao continued slowly. "Now it's your turn." The boy's horrible shrieks grew even more intense. His entire body shook, and he even tried to detonate his nascent divinity, but was incapable. His nascent divinity had already become withered, just like his soul. During that short moment, he experienced indescribable pain. His teeth fell out, and soon he didn't even have the energy to scream. Eventually, he was nothing more than a pool of yellowish liquid. He had been withered to death. After he died, the gray curse power up in the sky flew back to Meng Hao's palm. It transformed once again into the withering character. However, the magical symbol was not as resplendent as before. It was now dimmer by half. Half of the curse power remained after killing the red-robed boy. From this, the terrifying power of the curse could be seen. By this point, the battlefield was utterly silent. Even the battle between Patriarch Song and the other peak Dao-seeking experts had stopped, and they were looking on, dumbfounded. After a brief moment of silence, the Northern Reaches cultivators burst out into an uproar. The Patriarch of the Coffin Altar sect just died. The Patriarch of the Coffin Altar sect was at the peak of Dao-seeking. He just perished. At the same time, the Southern Domain cultivators were enlivened and seemed to have been rejuvenated, resuming their furious attacks with increased strength. Once again, the fighting broke out down below. As for the Northern Reaches peak Dao-seeking experts, they were inwardly shaken. This was the first time since the invasion had begun that a peak Dao-seeking cultivator had died. The old man in the animal hide clothing had eyes shot with blood. The red-robed boy had been one of his closest friends. With an enraged roar, he shot toward Meng Hao. Off to the side were the two old men who looked completely identical except for their contrasting black and white robes. They joined the old man in charging Meng Hao. The second true self's eyes glittered as he moved to intercept them. Booms rang out as he began a tremendous fight with the black and white twins. The old man in the animal hide clothing was going berserk. He spit blood out of his mouth and performed a double-handed incantation, causing all of his skin to suddenly change color. It rapidly became blue, and his speed increased dramatically. He skirted the second true self to head directly toward Meng Hao, toward whom he extended a powerful punch. Die! Meng Hao was quite close. His face was pale and blood was oozing out of his mouth. This was the first time he had used only his own power, and not that of his second true self, to attack and kill a peak Dao-seeking cultivator. As the man in the animal hide clothing closed in, Meng Hao extended his right hand down toward the ground. Immediately, a huge vortex appeared within the Northern Reaches army. The vortex was no longer golden but black. It looked like a huge mouth, ready to consume everything. Immediately, miserable screams could be heard from the Northern Reaches cultivators caught inside. They rapidly withered, and their cultivation bases flowed out through their mouths and noses. Even their souls were shaken and appeared to be on the verge of being sucked out. Are you MBLLE? Shockingly, 7 such vortexes appeared all over the battlefield. 7 huge vortexes enveloped nearly 30,000 Northern Reaches cultivators, extracting power from their blood and flesh, which shot up toward Meng Hao and fused into his body. It was the same with their cultivation base power. Meng Hao closed his eyes, and when he did, his cultivation base shot up. Suddenly, he transformed into what looked like a shooting star that sped directly toward the attacking old man. As he flew through the air, his eyes snapped open. The black mist face above him suddenly formed into the shocking shape of an enormous palm that slammed into the old man. A shocking boom filled the air. The old man tumbled backward in shock, blood spurting out of his mouth. At the same time, the miserable screams continued to echo out from down below. Quite a few within the vortexes had already withered and died. Meng Hao shot backward, biting the tip of his tongue and spitting some blood out. As soon as the blood emerged, it expanded, transforming into a lake of blood. That blood contained not just the power of Meng Hao's qi and blood, but the power of the qi and blood of the 30,000 cultivators stuck in the vortexes. All that power transformed into a lake that rumbled toward the old man in animal hide clothing. The old man's face fell. He pulled his hand back and it increased in size and sprouted spikes of bone. Then he punched out and a shocking boom rattled out. The lake of blood collapsed into pieces. In that moment, the black mist surrounding Meng Hao once again shot forward in attack. In a short period of time, constant booms rang out as hundreds of exchanges occurred between Meng Hao and the old man. The black mist surrounding Meng Hao continued to increase. The qi, blood, and cultivation base power from the cultivators down below was like a huge river pouring into his body, giving him shocking battle prowess. "Damn it, break!" roared the old man. He was leery of Meng Hao's withering character magical symbol. However, he never imagined that Meng Hao, without even using the magical symbol, would be so difficult to deal with. Finally, he slapped his chest and began to burn life force as he made a double-handed attack. 2 fists punched out, shattering the air, causing the sky to dim. Meng Hao's eyes shone with a cold light. He said nothing, nor did he evade. Instead, he shot forward, relying on his cultivation base, his fleshly body, the 9th mountain, everything. It was an explosive attack that contained his mad, devilish will, combined with the qi, blood, and cultivation bases absorbed by the vortexes, all merged into one palm strike. Another direct showdown. Still not dead, thought the old man, even as he retreated, coughing up blood. Meng Hao was also sent tumbling back, and his body exploded. However, the eternal stratum kicked in. Unfortunately, only a sliver of eternal power remained in him. It had been severely drained during his battle with the curse power. Currently, there wasn't enough power left to completely heal him. Seeing this caused killing intent to glitter in the old man's eyes. "Die," he cried, extending his hands out in front of him, not in fists but stretched out like claws. As he leaped out, the air distorted around him, and shockingly, he transformed into an enormous bird-like creature. It looked like a rock, with a beak that emitted a cold glow and talons that could rend heaven and earth. He shot toward Meng Hao with such incredible speed that he was nothing more than a streak flashing through the air. A fiendish wind buffeted Meng Hao's face as he lifted his right hand up to reveal the lightning cauldron. The cauldron began to flicker, and Meng Hao looked down at a northern reach's nascent soul cultivator down below. Suddenly, Meng Hao vanished. The savage nascent soul cultivator then appeared in the spot Meng Hao had just occupied, and Meng Hao was now where he had been down below. Form displacement transposition. The nascent soul cultivator saw bright colors flash across his eyes, and then suddenly he was up in midair. He couldn't help but be shocked. Moments ago, he had been preparing to plunge his hand through the chest of a southern domain cultivator. Now, he was floating up in the air. Suddenly, an intense sense of deadly crisis surged through him as he saw a vicious rock flying toward him at indescribable speed. It was impossible for him to dodge, and even his nascent soul was scared so witless that it seemed as if it would crumble to pieces. Boom! The rock smashed into him, sending blood spattering out in all directions. A roar of rage filled the sky as the rock turned blurry and the old man reappeared. He glared down at the ground, his eyes flaring with killing intent. "Meng Hao," he raged. Once again he transformed into a rock that shot toward the ground amidst a gale-force wind. Down below, Meng Hao stood in the midst of a huge force of shocked northern reaches cultivators, among whom he had seemed to just randomly appear. Before any of them could react, he gestured down toward the ground. Blood Demon Grand Magic. Rumble! An enormous vortex appeared, with Meng Hao in the center. It instantly enveloped several thousand people. As for the southern domain cultivators it caught up, they felt a gentle force pick them up and eject them from the vortex. Meng Hao remained within the vortex, his white hair swirling around. Once again he gestured downward, and his eyes were filled with calm coldness. Qi and blood. Rumbling could be heard as the northern reaches cultivators within the vortex began to shriek miserably and visibly wither at a rapid rate, regardless of the level of their cultivation bases. Huge quantities of qi and blood power poured into Meng Hao. His body grew stronger, and his internal injuries were healed significantly because of the borrowed power. "Spirit meridians," he said. Rumble. More miserable shrieks could be heard from the thousands stuck in the vortex. They were little more than skin and bones now that their qi and blood had been removed. The only thing they had left, their cultivation bases, transformed into white smoke that began to ooze out of their eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. Their eyes bulged and their faces began to grow blank. They were completely paralyzed, and the only thing they were capable of doing was trembling and screaming. Their cultivation bases flew out to be absorbed by Meng Hao, causing his own cultivation base to rise. His wounds were also healed even further. By this time, the old man in the shape of a rock was now bearing down on him, roaring with killing intent. "Soul," said Meng Hao, yelling out the final word. He would break through to the 5th level of the Blood Demon Grand Magic. Once he did, he would be able to control something that even his second true self couldn't control, something special that had been created for him by Patriarch Blood Demon. A false, immortal puppet. /expand. The soul character had been uttered. At that moment, the northern reaches cultivators stuck in the vortex around Meng Hao let out the last miserable shrieks that they would ever utter. Their bodies were withered dry, their cultivation bases vanished. Now, they felt an intense pain enveloping them like floodwaters. Everything went black in their eyes and the world disappeared. Their lives were no more. Numerous wailing, struggling souls emerged from their eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Each and every cultivator's back was arched, their face sunken, and their eyes gray. Their mouths were stuck open stiffly. Their souls emerged and then fused into the vortex, becoming a cyclone of souls. Anyone who could see the spectacle was flabbergasted. Demonic magic, that's demonic magic. Such a sinister divine ability has got to be demon magic. The northern reaches cultivators in the area were trembling and their hearts were filled with terror. Horrified, they watched as the souls spun into a cyclone, and Meng Hao gestured toward the ground, then looked up. His white hair floated around him, and his eyes glowed with a cold ruthlessness. His face was also as pale as death, making his overall appearance like that of a devilish god. The souls of the slain around him looked like slaves incapable of escaping him. Up in the sky, the old man who was in rock form gasped, completely shaken by what he was seeing. However, killing intent flickered in his eyes and ferociousness burned in his heart. He continued to dive directly toward Meng Hao. "Your occult trickery won't work on me, die." Meng Hao's eyes flickered, and as the old man bore down on him, he suddenly blasted up from the ground. The cyclone of countless struggling souls surrounded him, looking almost like a river as he sped to meet the rock. A boom echoed out, and even as strong and stalwart as he was, the old man couldn't stop the blood from oozing out of the corners of his mouth. He could no longer maintain the form of a rock, and reverted to his human form as he tumbled backward. Blood sprayed from Meng Hao's mouth, and the ground beneath him cracked and split, radiating in all directions. The struggling souls exploded, transforming into motes of soul light that then sped toward Meng Hao and fused into his body. Meng Hao could sense that he had reached the threshold of the blood demon grand magic's 5th level. "I need even more souls," he thought, his eyes flickering. Not waiting for the old man to charge him again, he produced the lightning cauldron. There was a flicker, and he switched places with another Northern Reaches cultivator. He appeared once again in the middle of the Northern Reaches army, whereupon he immediately gestured toward the ground. A vortex appeared as the blood demon grand magic once again surged into motion. It almost seemed as if, to Meng Hao, the Northern Reaches cultivators were merely food. They were essential to his ability to combat a peak Dao-seeking expert. As he absorbed them, miserable screams filled the air. Qi, blood, and cultivation bases were sucked away, used by Meng Hao to strengthen his fleshly body to the point where it burst from the mid-Dao-seeking stage into late Dao-seeking. As for his cultivation base, it now exceeded spirit severing and had temporarily entered into Dao-seeking. Natural law swirled around him, making Meng Hao even more valiant. The blood demon grand magic was most suited to fighting against multiple opponents. The more enemies there were, the more invincible one could become. Up in midair, the old man in animal hide clothing roared. His body flashed as he transformed, not into a rock, but into a gigantic black python. He opened his vicious mouth and struck toward Meng Hao as if to swallow him up. Meng Hao waited in the vortex as the python closed in. Thousands of Northern Reaches cultivators could be heard screaming as their bodies withered, their cultivation bases faded, and they neared death. Suddenly, Meng Hao said soul, and a rumbling could be heard as the thousands of cultivators exploded, and their souls flew out. Then Meng Hao vanished. Even as the python was about to reach him, he was off in the distance, where another blood demon grand magic vortex sprang up. The old man was completely infuriated, and yet there was nothing he could do to stop Meng Hao and the lightning cauldron. The agile teleportation-like ability made it incredibly difficult to pin Meng Hao down, and left him shocked in his heart. "Damn it, Meng Hao, I dare you to fight me one-on-one." Killing intent flickered in the old man's eyes. This time, he didn't pursue Meng Hao, but instead flew toward the Southern Domain's army of cultivators. "If you won't come out and fight, then I'll just start killing some Southern Domain cultivators." Meng Hao stopped in place, then waved his right hand. The blood demon grand magic appeared and the lightning cauldron flickered. This time, he changed positions with the old man. After the exchange took place, the old man was shocked to find himself directly in the middle of one of Meng Hao's vortexes. Meng Hao hovered in midair, looking coldly at the old man. "Wanna fight?" he said. "Let's fight then." He stretched his arms out to either side, and the multiple vortexes he had created moments ago echoed with the shocked screams of Northern Reaches cultivators. Qi and blood flowed toward him, causing Meng Hao's body to once again reach the peak of Dao-seeking. Rumbling filled the air as the old man's body began to wither. However, he was able to struggle his way out, whereupon he aimed a punch at Meng Hao. "Die!" Meng Hao clenched his fists and shot forward to meet him. The two of them flashed back and forth over 100 times, causing booms to rattle everything in the area. Finally, the old man's eyes flashed with a bright light. Suddenly, two golden birds flew out from within his pupils, emitting shrill cries as they shot toward Meng Hao. At the same time, the old man began to spin rapidly like a top. He lifted his right leg high into the air and then slammed it down toward Meng Hao's head. If the kick connected, Meng Hao would obviously suffer a serious injury. Meng Hao's eyes glittered coldly as he said, "Spirit meridians." Immediately, more miserable shrieks could be heard coming from the northern reaches cultivators stuck in the vortexes down below. Their cultivation bases were sucked away through their noses and mouths to shoot directly toward Meng Hao. Cultivation bases swirled around Meng Hao in the form of a tempest, bolstering his own cultivation base until it was as strong as the peak of Tao Seeking. He quickly performed an incantation gesture and pointed towards the sky. Ninth Mountain Crush. Rumbling filled the air as the majestic Ninth Mountain appeared up above. It was huge, almost like a real mountain, and the natural law that swirled around it stirred the sky and caused the land to shake. Massive pressure crushed down on the old man. The old man lifted his head up and roared. His body expanded rapidly as he turned into a mountain-like giant. He immediately raised both hands into the air and grabbed onto the Ninth Mountain. A boom could be heard as the Ninth Mountain slammed into him. Blood sprayed from his mouth, and cracking sounds could be heard as he managed to resist it. "Soul," said Meng Hao, his eyes radiating coldness. As the northern reaches cultivators in the vortexes toppled over dead, struggling souls flew toward Meng Hao from their eyes, ears, noses, and mouths. The vast quantities of souls merging into Meng Hao's body caused a rumbling sound to fill his head. All of a sudden, he reached the 5th level of the Blood Demon Grand Magic. In that moment, Meng Hao's cultivation base did not change. However, his battle prowess instantly grew several times over. His hair whipped about, and he looked every bit like a devilish divinity. His eyes shone like suns, and the entire battlefield down below was obscured by the shadow of the black mist that surged around him. It was as if he was blotting out the entire heavens. He took a deep breath and then advanced forward. The old man let out an enraged roar as he shoved upward with his arms. Apparently, he was causing some form of natural law to spring into motion. Now, cracking sounds could be heard coming from the Ninth Mountain, and then it shattered into countless pieces. "Little bastard," said the old man, blood oozing out of the corners of his mouth. Collapsing the Ninth Mountain had taken quite a bit of effort on his part. Now, his body flickered as he transformed into a white tiger, which roared and pounced toward Meng Hao. This time, Meng Hao didn't evade. The two cultivators met in midair. Booms echoed out as they fought back and forth. "Qi and blood," said Meng Hao coolly. This time, a tiny vortex appeared in the palm of his hand. When he landed a blow on the front leg of the old man's tiger form, the entire leg instantly turned into skin and bones. The sudden, shocking turn of events caused the old man's face to fall. He gasped. A tremor ran through his white tiger form, and he retreated at top speed. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with killing intent. How could he possibly allow the old man to flee as simply as that? His body flashed through the air, and he appeared right next to the old man. The vortex in the palm of his right hand shot toward the old man's back. "Screw off," roared the old man. Immediately, his cultivation base surged with an explosion of qi that shot outward. Meng Hao gave a cold snort and continued on with his palm strike. "Spirit meridians." A boom could be heard as he absorbed, not qi and blood, but cultivation base. As the terrifying cultivation base explosion emanating from the old man reached Meng Hao simply touched it with his hand, and it appeared to collapse. Boundless cultivation base power immediately began to fuse into Meng Hao's palm. The old man's scalp went numb. He could never have imagined that Meng Hao's magical technique could be so shocking. In 2 short moments of contact, he had lost 10% of his cultivation base as well as his qi and blood. It was nothing short of terrifying to the man, and he immediately fell back in retreat. Meng Hao pursued without any hesitation. They fought back and forth, and the old man let out continuous roars. He didn't dare to get too close but could only flee at top speed under an unending bombardment from Meng Hao. Blood sprayed from his mouth, and he fell back. Meng Hao's face was cold, and his killing intent raged. Onlookers could hardly believe what they were seeing. The old man in animal hide clothing was incapable of fighting back against Meng Hao, and was being beaten to the point that he was forced to retreat. "Save me," he cried, his mind trembling. His body was quickly becoming nothing more than skin and bones, and he had lost 40% of the power of his cultivation base. He knew that he was in a moment of grave crisis. The Northern Reaches cultivators were astonished, and the other 5 Northern Reaches Peak Dao-seeking experts up above were shaken. Moments ago, when Meng Hao had slain the red-robed boy, they were shocked. However, in their minds, Meng Hao had simply used some sort of trickery to win. but seeing what he was doing now left them thoroughly rattled. Just when they were about to make a move to help the old man, the withering character flickered into being next to Meng Hao. Gray light radiated out, and all of the Peak Dao-seeking experts halted in place. They didn't dare to get close to him. That was exactly why Meng Hao hadn't used the withering character again. The magical symbol's greatest use to him right now was as a threat against any outside interference. Chapter 776, Fifth Level of the Blood Demon Grand Magic. Chapter 777, Dawn Immortal, Do You Dare to Fight Me? Meng Hao was a shooting star that closed in on the old man in animal hide clothing. He pointed out his index finger, and the 8th demon sealing hex appeared, causing the old man to freeze in place, trembling. In that moment, Meng Hao thrust his right hand violently at the old man's chest and stabbed into the flesh. Qi and blood spirit meridians. Boom! The old man howled miserably as he fell back. His body withered up, and his cultivation base flowed out from him. He quickly bit the tip of his tongue and spat out some blood. The blood expanded in midair, shockingly transforming into a huge blood-colored cauldron which slammed towards Meng Hao in an attempt to shake him off. Meng Hao snorted coldly, then clenched his hand into a fist and punched. He landed a blow onto the cauldron that was backed by his qi and blood, the energy of tens of thousands of cultivators, and even the power of the old man himself. A huge boom echoed out over the battlefield. The cauldron immediately shattered into pieces. As Meng Hao's fist passed through the remnants, it transformed into a palm, and then a claw which latched onto the old man's face. Rumbling filled the air as qi, blood, and spirit meridians were rapidly sucked out of the old man's body. The old man screamed in pain and shoved his hands out toward Meng Hao. In response, Meng Hao vanished, then reappeared behind the man. He slapped his hand down onto the man's back. "Save me," cried the old man. The sense of deadly crisis he felt caused his mind to reel. "No one can save you now," responded Meng Hao, his voice icy cold. However, it was at this moment that a leaf suddenly appeared. Not just one leaf, but many, emanating scintillating glows as they descended from above. An aura also appeared that Meng Hao was very familiar with. The voice of a woman then echoed out coldly across the battlefield. "What if I save him?" Leaves fluttered down over the lands of the southern domain. The innumerable leaves began to spin, then rapidly formed together into the shape of a woman. She wore a colorful gown and exuded a palpable, exotic allure that would attract anyone who looked at her. However, this was no girl, it was a woman. It was the mother of the resurrection lily, the Dawn Immortal. She stretched out her right hand and pointed toward Meng Hao. Numerous branches suddenly appeared around him. They expanded rapidly and then grew together, transforming into a cage that threatened to completely seal Meng Hao up. "You showed up at the battle of the Blood Demon sect, and now you show up again here. Screw off." Killing intent flashed in Meng Hao's eyes as his cultivation base exploded with power. It transformed into a cyclone that thrashed about in all directions, smashing a hole in the cage of branches. Meng Hao instantly shot out from within and immediately headed in the old man's direction. The Dawn Immortal laughed coldly and waved her right hand. Shockingly, a 7-colored leaf appeared, which shone with prismatic light as it sped toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's mind trembled, and yet he didn't slow down in his pursuit of the weakened old man. He caught up in a short moment, and then reached out his hand to push down onto the top of the old man's head. "Soul," he said calmly. The old man immediately let out a shriek of pain. His body trembled, his mouth opened wide, and his eyes bulged. His soul began to seep out through his nose and mouth in many delicate strands that were quickly absorbed by Meng Hao. "Looking to die," said the Dawn Immortal, her eyes flickering with killing intent. The 7-colored leaf picked up speed as it closed in on Meng Hao. In the blink of an eye, it was about to hit him. Meng Hao took the old man and violently tossed him forward to slam into the leaf. A boom echoed out, and the old man's body exploded. He was dead in body and spirit. As for Meng Hao, he retreated immediately, his face somewhat pale. Having absorbed the old man's complete cultivation base, as well as all of his qi and blood, plus his soul, he was now filled with indescribable energy. Resisting the leaf attack caused him to retreat, but did not injure him. Now that the leaf was heading toward him for a second attack, his eyes flashed with killing intent. The lightning cauldron appeared, and a flash of electricity could be seen. In that moment, he switched places with one of the Peak Dao-seeking experts who was fighting Pill Demon and the others, the old woman. In response to the form displacement transposition, The old woman's face fell. The seven-colored leaf ground to a halt, then changed directions and shot after Meng Hao. By this point, Meng Hao was next to Patriarch Song, with whom he joined forces to launch an attack against the white-robed hopping vampire that was a Northern Reaches Peak Dao-seeking expert. A boom could be heard, and the white-robed old man coughed up a mouthful of blood. Even as he fell back, the seven-colored leaf neared. The flash of electricity surrounded Meng Hao, and he then appeared in the middle of the Northern Reaches army down below. Blood demon grand magic vortexes instantly appeared, enveloping thousands. Qi, blood, spirit meridians and souls were all absorbed, and miserable screams rang out. Then Meng Hao vanished again. Meng Hao had long since completely mastered the use of the lightning cauldron. The Peak Dao-seeking experts in midair were shocked. Damn it! What kind of magical item is that lightning cauldron? This Meng Hao is too hard to pin down. Meng Hao's actions in the battle were strange and mysterious. He attacked with ruthless viciousness that left them thoroughly shaken. By now, Meng Hao was an archenemy in their minds. It was such a threat that they knew he needed to be eliminated immediately. "I'll deal with him," said the Dawn Immortal coolly. Her eyes flashed with seven-colored light that bathed the entire area, apparently in an attempt to seal it. "That toy of yours is quite mysterious," she said a moment later. "I can't completely seal it, but what I can do is slow down the transpositioning speed. Go ahead and try it out now." Then she began to advance on Meng Hao. As she neared, an intense pressure weighed down on everything. Furthermore, a vicious, seven-colored resurrection lily appeared behind her. The flower swayed back and forth, obviously immaculately beautiful, and yet at the same time boundlessly evil. Meng Hao's expression was calm and did not reveal the slightest shift in emotions. He put away the lightning cauldron and then pulled out a blood-colored puppet the size of a hand. The puppet flew out from Meng Hao's hand and then began to grow. By the time it was 30 meters tall, it exploded with a shocking aura. Wild colors flashed through the sky and the clouds churned. This was the aura of an immortal. Not a true immortal aura, but that of a false immortal. Either way, it was still immortal. The Dawn Immortal's face flickered for the first time, and the handful of Peak Dao-seeking experts from the Northern Reaches were all shocked. This puppet was the trump card of the combined forces of the Solitary Sword Sect, Golden Frost Sect, Black Civ Sect, and Li Clan when they besieged the Blood Demon Sect. Were it not for the appearance of Patriarch Blood Demon back then, it would have clinched the victory. Instead, Patriarch Blood Demon slaughtered the Solitary Sword Sect Patriarch, then made some alterations to the puppet so that only Meng Hao could use it. That was his reward for reaching the 5th level of the Blood Demon Grand Magic. Meng Hao's body flickered as he merged into the 30-meter-tall blood-colored puppet. Moments ago, its eyes had been dark, but now they radiated a grim light, just like Meng Hao's eyes. As Meng Hao took control of the puppet, it suddenly stood up. A shocking false immortal aura exploded outwards across the battlefield, turning into a shock wave that swept out, forcing the Northern Reaches cultivators to fall back amid shocked gasps. As for the Southern Domain cultivators, their spirits were lifting, and they began to shout out Meng Hao's name. Sound waves rippled across the land, causing everything to shake. "Dawn Immortal, do you dare to fight me?" Meng Hao flew up into the air and then pointed toward the Dawn Immortal. A sound like thunder could be heard, and an intense pressure rumbled out. The earth cracked and the air shattered. In the blink of an eye, a black wind rose up to sweep across the land. The Dawn Immortal did not speak, but her eyes glittered with a mysterious light. She stretched her beautiful hand out and pointed. The apparition of the resurrection lily behind her passed through her body and flew into the air, its tentacles writhing in a bizarre and awe-inspiring fashion as it charged toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao snorted coldly. Due to his control of the puppet, he felt as if he was completely connected to heaven and earth. He waved his hand, and dark clouds appeared in the sky. Lightning descended like rain, transforming into a lake of lightning that enveloped the resurrection lily. "Nothing but a false immortal," said the Dawn Immortal coolly, shaking her head. "If you use it, you'll sow karma with the Jai clan." Suddenly she vanished, and when she reappeared, she was directly in front of Meng Hao. She lifted her hand up, then dropped it. Seven-colored light radiated brightly, transforming into a seven-colored sun that exploded into Meng Hao. A huge boom shook everything. Even the Peak Dao-seeking experts were flung aside. The old woman among their number was just about to retreat when, shockingly, Sun Tao of the Violet Fate Sect transformed into a powerful beam of light that completely inundated her. She let out a miserable scream that echoed out in all directions. "My body has already returned to the dust and I can't hold out any longer," echoed the voice of Sun Tao from within the light. "Before I leave, I'll take this woman with me. Fellow Taoists, I sincerely hope that you achieve complete victory. Master, I can't be your apprentice alchemist any longer, nor will I be able to see you achieve true, immortal ascension." A huge boom could be heard as the light exploded. The screams of the old woman from the northern reaches were suddenly cut off. Brilliant light covered everything, even Meng Hao and the Dawn Immortal. Meng Hao felt stabs of pain in his heart. When the light faded away, Sun Tao was gone, as was the old woman. Pill Demon trembled and tears streamed down his face. He lifted his head up and began to laugh sadly. Suddenly, innumerable magical symbols began to appear on his body. One by one, they started shattering into pieces. In the blink of an eye, more than half of them were gone. At the same time, his cultivation base shot up. He was no longer in the mid-Dao seeking stage. He broke completely through to the late Dao seeking stage, and then broke through again into peak Dao seeking. The destruction of the magical symbols was not something he could consciously do. Rather, it was provoked by the intense feelings that surged through him. Now that Pill Demon was in the peak Dao seeking stage, an unfamiliar aura appeared on his body. Furthermore, his appearance had changed. Now, he looked exactly like the statue of Reverend Violet East from back in the Violet Fate sect. Chapter 778, Decisive Battle with the Dawn Immortal. Reverend Violet East. Having seen everything that had happened, Patriarch Song's expression was a complex one. "A powerful expert from 10,000 years ago," he murmured. "At one time, you were the number one chosen in the entire southern domain, Reverend Violet East. You founded the Violet Fate sect and were its first-generation patriarch. You were at the peak of Tao seeking 10,000 years ago, but weren't willing to become a false immortal. You vowed to tread the path of true immortal ascension. Before transcending the tribulation, however, you realized that you were on the incorrect path. You personally concocted a medicinal pill that contained a strand of your own soul. That pill became your vessel, with which you reestablished your cultivation. Now in our time you have once again reached the peak of Tao seeking as Pill Demon. When all of the magical symbols are destroyed, the true immortal tribulation that you have been suppressing will finally be unleashed. Unfortunately, throughout the years, far too many people have died during true immortal tribulation. Few have ever succeeded. Pill Demon, can you succeed?" Patriarch Song sighed. Pill Demon didn't reply. Violet Chi swirled around him as he advanced forward. His aura was completely different than it had been before. Shockingly, he was now powerful enough to single-handedly fight two of the most powerful Northern Reaches peak Dao-seeking experts, and apparently even suppress them. Booms echoed out as Pill Demon's intense power caused everyone to be filled with shock. Even the mother of the Resurrection Lily, the Dawn Immortal, looked over and raised an eyebrow. Patriarch Song shook his head and sighed, then once again began to fight the other peak Dao-seeking experts, along with Meng Hao's second true self and the severely wounded Patriarch Golden Frost. Down on the ground, the Northern Reaches cultivators were shocked to the core to have seen such a succession of defeats just now. After adding in the losses that had occurred earlier, the tide of battle between the Northern Reaches and the Southern Domain had completely reversed. The Southern Domain cultivators' eyes were red as they closed ranks and then screamed through the air in attack, more than 100,000 strong. Blood flowed in rivers, and the sky darkened. The sounds of slaughter immediately caused everything to shake. Up above, Meng Hao and the Dawn Immortal were fighting fiercely. The forces unleashed by their attacks seemed capable of collapsing the sky and the land. The Dawn Immortal's cultivation base was mysterious and enigmatic. Although this was nothing more than a clone, it was still incredibly powerful. In the short time she had been battling Meng Hao, they had exchanged more than 1,000 moves. Massive rumbling caused many of the nearby mountains to crumble. Now, only Mount Blood Demon stood strong and tall. However, Patriarch Blood Demon remained inside, his eyes closed in deep sleep. His body seemed to lack even the slightest scrap of life force. Despite the violent trembling in the world around him, he did not awaken. The ground cracked and rifts appeared in the sky. Meng Hao and the Dawn Immortals' combat was like the collision of two storm fronts. The ninth mountain appeared, then shattered. The black-white pearls appeared, then were suppressed. The Resurrection Lily writhed, transforming into a whip which the Dawn Immortal used to slash holes into the air itself. The difficulty of this battle far exceeded what the Northern Reaches cultivators could ever have imagined or predicted. Meng Hao's appearance on the battlefield had completely turned the battle around. First was the death of the red-robed boy, and then the old man in animal hide clothing perished. The pinnacle of the northern reaches fighting forces had been reduced by 30%. That was something that could determine victory or defeat in a battle. Then the Dawn Immortal appeared, and she seemed to be capable of getting control of the situation. But contrary to what everyone would have expected, Meng Hao pulled out a false immortal puppet. With the body of a false immortal puppet, he was now engaged in a duel with the Dawn Immortal that cast the sky and land into complete shadow. In addition, Pill Demon awakened, unleashing peak Dao-seeking power. Now, the Northern Reaches cultivators were getting quite anxious. At the moment, it seemed that securing victory was no easy task. Rumbling echoed out and Meng Hao spit up blood. Popping sounds could be heard as cracks spread out through his puppet body. Up ahead, the Dawn Immortal was frowning. The false immortal puppet was forcing her to use all the power she could muster. Even more shocking was Meng Hao's blood demon grand magic, which continuously popped up around the Dawn Immortal. The more he used it in battle, the stronger he got. It was extremely difficult to deal with. The Dawn Immortal's true self was in the Milky Way Sea and could not leave, which meant that the battle was now in a deadlock. Of course, the fact that there was a deadlock was a good thing for the Northern Reaches cultivators. This group here was the main force of the second wave of invaders. Currently, there were 4 other armies in other parts of the southern domain, stabbing toward the blood demon sect like sharp arrows. It would only be a matter of time before they arrived. Although those armies did not contain any peak Dao-seeking experts, only spirit-severing leaders, their combined forces numbered over 100,000. Once they arrived, they would be a critical factor in ending the deadlock. Most important of all, the hundreds of thousands of Northern Reaches cultivators were only the second wave of the Northern Reaches Expeditionary Army. Currently, the third wave of 1 million cultivators was making its way across the Resurrection Lily Bridge. The third wave was en route, in battle formation, and once they arrived in the southern domain, they would add 4 peak Dao-seeking experts to the battle. Furthermore, they were not just any peak Dao-seeking experts. They were the 4 most powerful patriarchs in the entire Northern Reaches. Among their number was the Imperial Bloodline clan chief, whose cultivation base was monstrous. He was capable of battling false immortals. Once they reached the southern domain, victory would be assured. This was something all the Northern Reaches cultivators were aware of, and the southern domain cultivators could conclude via speculation. All of the peak Dao-seeking cultivators in midair were also aware of these facts. There was nothing the southern domain could do about it. If things went on too much longer, great tribulation would fall upon the southern domain. Unless they could quickly overcome this second wave of Northern Reaches cultivators before the third wave arrived. Perhaps that would buy them enough time to set up some spell formations, as well as get some much-needed rest. If that didn't happen, and the ferocity they had experienced so far continued with wave after wave of opponents, then the southern domain forces would continue to sink further into exhaustion and would have no time for vital preparations. Meng Hao's eyes shone with a cold light as he fought back and forth with the Dawn Immortal. He, too, was aware of the overall situation, and it caused his eyes to flicker with killing intent. He took a deep breath, and even as he moved in for another attack, an expression of determination filled his face. Without the slightest hesitation, he performed an incantation, causing a divine ability to appear. Using all the power of the false immortal puppet that he could muster, he suddenly caused a blinding light to shine out. Beams of light appeared, making Meng Hao's puppet look like a sun above the battlefield, casting bright light in all directions. A powerful destructive force then began to surge out from the puppet. This was a sign of self-detonation, which would unleash an unthinkably destructive force. After all, this was a false immortal puppet. The power released by its self-detonation would turn into a petrifyingly powerful attack. The terrifying aura that appeared immediately caused the minds of everyone on the battlefield to spin. As for the peak Dao-seeking experts of the Northern Reaches, their faces fell. He's going to self-detonate. The self-detonation of that puppet will unleash an incredible shockwave that would cause even a false immortal to perish. Meng Hao. The Dawn Immortal's pupils constricted, and her heart filled with a sense of grave crisis. As she prepared to retreat, she twirled the Resurrection Lily whip into circles, creating a defensive shield. Meng Hao's determination left her completely shocked. She knew that this was a false immortal puppet, something that would put Meng Hao in a superior position virtually anywhere he went in the lands of South Heaven. Any powerful group would attach incredible value to a false, immortal puppet. It was a precious treasure that could certainly lead to violent conflicts. And yet, Meng Hao was now going to blow the thing up. The shocked Dawn Immortal had just finished forming her shield when Meng Hao, utilizing the intense surge of power that came just before the detonation, increased his speed and suddenly appeared directly in front of her. He did nothing to prevent her from unleashing various divine abilities. Instead, he stretched out his hands, coughed up blood, and then wrapped his arms around her. He held tight to the Dawn Immortal, after which the eighth demon sealing hex suddenly caused her body to momentarily lurch, frozen in place. Under Meng Hao's control, the puppet shot high up into the sky. "You're looking to die," she said coldly, her face flickering. For the first time, she appeared to be truly angry. The illusory resurrection lily whipped about, unleashing wild attacks. Instantly, more cracks spread out across the puppet. Inside, Meng Hao coughed up blood and trembled. Each of the attacks being slammed against him could have injured someone at the peak of Tao seeking. As the puppet continued to disintegrate, innumerable beams of light shot out, and the ground quaked. All of the cultivators looked up in astonishment. What they saw looked exactly like a sun. Pill Demon's heart was racing. He knew of Meng Hao's eternal recovery abilities, as well as the Blood Demon Grand Magic. However, this was the self-detonation of an immortal soul. Pill Demon had no idea whether Meng Hao could survive such a blast. Patriarch Song was also incredibly nervous. Most nervous of all were the 4 remaining peak Tao-seeking experts from the northern reaches. Their hearts were pounding as they realized that, if the Dawn Immortal was destroyed in the detonation and Meng Hao survived, then there would be no way for them to continue fighting this battle. Unless the third wave of the army showed up, they would be forced to either flee or be killed. Up in the air, the Dawn Immortal was struggling wildly. Meng Hao's face was twisted ferociously, and a vicious air surrounded him. He had been pestered for years because of the Dawn Immortal and was completely fed up with her. "The one that's going to die is you," he said through clenched teeth, shooting higher up into the sky. Self-detonating down below wasn't an option. Too many people would be killed, both friend and foe alike. His only option was to self-detonate high up in the air and focus all the power on destroying the Dawn Immortal. When he reached the apex of his flight, fear appeared on the face of the Dawn Immortal for the first time. By now, she realized that no matter what she did, she could not free herself. A strange light began to gleam in her eyes, and suddenly, countless leaves began to sprout out from her skin. The enormous whip transformed into a huge resurrection lily that began to wrap around her. At this very moment, the light emanating from Meng Hao's puppet had reached its brightest point. The air was shattered, and the sky flashed with colors. An explosive boom and an indescribably powerful destructive force exploded out, sweeping across the entirety of the southern domain. Everything was shaken violently. The gigantic flower which surrounded the Dawn Immortal was ripped into pieces, destroyed like a dried weed, exposing from within a face filled with complete terror. In the next instant, the Dawn Immortal's figure was enveloped by the wave of destructive power. Inside the puppet, Meng Hao's flesh was slashed into pieces and he began to burn. Some of his skin even began to melt. At that moment, when he was just about to be enveloped, the lightning cauldron appeared in his hand. Coldness gleamed in his eyes. He might be in a deadly and critical situation, racked with intense pain, but he was not flustered in the slightest. His eyes shifted, to look down toward the battlefield, at one of the peak Tao-seeking experts of the northern domain. It was a middle-aged patriarch with a long violet robe, surrounded by a swirling, illusory flood dragon. This chapter was sponsored by Jake Ridgway. /expand. Heaven and earth trembled, and the thunder-like, rumbling sound of the explosion echoed out through the entire southern domain. The self-detonation of the false immortal puppet didn't just shake the southern domain. Ripples of air turbulence spread throughout the northern reaches, and the clouds above the eastern lands churned. Simultaneously, as the destructive power washed over Meng Hao, his body flashed with lightning. Form displacement transposition. His body vanished, and when he reappeared, he was in the spot just occupied by the middle-aged man with the violet robe and flood dragons. The peak Tao-seeking expert from the northern reaches reappeared where Meng Hao had been. He did not even have enough time to let out a miserable shriek before the power of destruction overwhelmed him. Massive rumbling sounds filled everyone's ears. It almost seemed as if the sky would collapse and fall. The peak Tao-seeking expert was instantly killed, and the Dawn Immortal was enveloped by the destructive force. Even any sound or sign of her was incapable of escaping. However, the two halves of the Resurrection Lily Bridge that stretched out across the Milky Way sea trembled, as if they were being racked with intense pain. Rumbling sounds could be heard as parts of the bridge collapsed, the tentacles transformed into nothing more than ash. A screeching cry sounded out from the Resurrection Lily, so powerful that it caused the ground to split and the sky to shake. Xianxia. Back in the southern domain, Meng Hao appeared next to Patriarch Song on the battlefield, and his body was a bloody mess. The only part that remained intact was the hand that held the lightning cauldron. The rest of his body was in tatters. His skin was flayed off and his blood dried up. His vital organs were visible inside, and half of his head was destroyed. Upon cursory glance, it seemed that he would be incapable of anything but dying. His eternal stratum was virtually exhausted and still in the process of repairing itself. As such, it was incapable of restoring Meng Hao's body. These were wounds that even the most miraculous medicinal pills would be incapable of healing. Immense amounts of destructive force had battered Meng Hao. The fact that he didn't die in the blast was actually pure luck. Were it not for the heaven-defying lightning cauldron, Meng Hao would most assuredly have been destroyed. Even still, when he reappeared, the remaining 3 peak Dao-seeking experts from the northern reaches gasped and unconsciously fell back. They didn't dare to try to take the chance to make a move. Meng Hao's initial savagery and ruthlessness, his fearsome act of self-detonation, the slaughtering of the Dawn Immortal's clone, the casual slaying of the peak Dao-seeking expert. All of these things ensured that his fearsome name struck terror into the hearts of anyone and everyone. A buzz of conversation rose up from the more than 100,000 cultivators from the northern reaches. He's still not dead. Look at how mangled his body is, and yet he's still alive. Pill Demon rushed over with medicinal pills, while Patriarch Song and Patriarch Golden Frost immediately sped to Meng Hao's side to stand guard. "Hey, said Pill Demon with great urgency. As for Meng Hao's second true self, he sagged listlessly and darkened. After all, if Meng Hao died, then he would most certainly also die. Meng Hao couldn't speak. His eyes were blank and his expression looked confused. An aura of death swirled around him, as if he might pass away completely at any moment. He only had one tiny scrap of consciousness remaining. He looked down toward the ground at the astonished northern reaches cultivators. Then the lightning cauldron flickered and he vanished. When he reappeared, he had switched places with one of the northern reaches cultivators. Then his hand exploded. The only intact portion of his body that remained was half of his head. Even the last remaining part of his head exploded into a bloody mist as it fell on the ground. The mist didn't vanish, though. It suddenly bored into the body of a nearby northern reaches cultivator, entering through his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. The northern reaches cultivator let out a blood-curdling scream. His body began to writhe, and blue veins popped out on his forehead. His expression was one of astonishment and horror. "No, help me," in the middle of his sentence, his words were cut short. He began to wither as his chi, blood, cultivation base, and soul were all sucked away. As he died, vast quantities of red mist emerged from inside of him, which then split into 2 streams that then spread out once more. Miserable screams rang out. Quickly a shocking change occurred on the battlefield. Rumbling sounds filled the air as one northern reaches cultivator after another withered up and died. The blood mist then split from 2 parts into 4, then 8, then 16, then 32, then 64. In the end, hundreds of streams of blood mist spread out, boring into hundreds of bodies, sucking away their chi, blood, cultivation base, and soul. Then the mist spread out again. All it took was the blink of an eye for thousands of streams of red mist to be visible. It was evil, devilish, and seemed to be sentient as it spread out, avoiding all southern domain cultivators and seeking only northern reaches cultivators to destroy. Up in midair were the 3 peak Dao-seeking patriarchs from the northern reaches. There were the 2 identical old men who wore black and white clothing and looked like hopping vampires. The other bore the semblance of a young man, around whom swirled mysterious magical symbols. From the look of it, each one of those magical symbols contained some type of weapon, just ready to be unleashed. All 3 of them looked at what was happening with complete shock. After exchanging glances, they didn't hesitate any longer. Employing all the speed they could muster, they fled off into the distance. How could they possibly dare to continue the fight? The Dawn Immortal was dead. Of the 7 peak Dao-seeking experts, 4 were gone, 3 of them slain by Meng Hao. Furthermore, it seemed apparent that Meng Hao still wasn't dead. There was no way they could possibly dare to stay behind. Besides, Pill Demon was now at the peak of Tao seeking, as were Patriarch Golden Frost and Patriarch Song. Those three alone were enough to cause problems, and that was not to mention Meng Hao's second true self. He might seem weak, but if Meng Hao recovered, he would be yet another powerful enemy. There was simply no way to continue to fight. The death of the Dawn Immortal's clone had sealed the fate of the Northern Reach's second army. The remaining three peak Dao-seeking experts fled, shivering in fear. Their only hope was to rendezvous with the Third Wave Army. Only then would they possibly dare to reappear and face Meng Hao. It wasn't that it didn't occur to them to seize this opportunity to try to kill Meng Hao once and for all. Rather, the risk was too great. Fleeing was the safest option. The three fleeing Dao-seeking experts completely ignored the remaining 100,000 or more Northern Reaches cultivators down below. As for Patriarch Song and the others, they hesitated for a moment as they considered whether or not to pursue them. In the end, they decided that Meng Hao was more important. Even if they did catch up with them, it wouldn't be easy to secure a win in a short period of time. Pill Demon and the others exchanged glances. "Don't interfere with him," said Pill Demon. "Let's start setting up spell formations to seal this place off and protect him." "That's the correct course of action. He's using the Blood Demon Grand Magic to recover. Let's go." Immediately, they split up and began to seal down the area. Down below, the blood mist raged. It was now split into more than 10,000 streams, which completely obfuscated the sky and land. Vast quantities of Northern Reaches cultivators were being consumed. No Blood Demon Grand Magic vortexes could be seen. The blood mist bored directly into the cultivators. They were incapable of fleeing, and their bodies were withered rapidly. Their fate was sealed. Their chi and blood, their cultivation bases, and their souls all became living sacrifices. Miserable shrieks filled the battlefield, along with cries of pain. The Southern Domain cultivators were completely shocked and surprised by what they were witnessing. What they saw was countless withered corpses with wide eyes and lifeless faces, filled with what seemed to be the utmost pain. The blood mist grew larger and larger. Soon there were tens of thousands of streams, which were now forming a nucleus in the place where Meng Hao had initially exploded. As for the mist itself, it seemed to stretch out from that central nucleus. Soon, a tempest of bloody mist seethed around that nucleus, rapidly transforming it into something that looked like a cocoon. Then, something that resembled a shocking heartbeat could suddenly be heard. Thump-thump, thump-thump, thump-thump. Every heartbeat caused the land to tremble and the sky to darken. It was as if the entire world were being covered by infinite ferocity. Boundless red mist seemed to be stretching out from the cocoon. There were now more than 50,000 streams sweeping about, making it impossible for the Northern Reaches cultivators to flee. "Inoo. Damn you, Southern Domain cultivators, you're too ruthless. Kill them, kill some of these Southern Domain bastards while there's still the chance." The Northern Reaches cultivators who had invaded the Southern Domain seethed with hatred and let out enraged shouts. Meanwhile, far out among the stars outside of planet South Heaven, there was a mighty river that no cultivator would be able to see, speeding along. At first glance, the river seemed to be frothy and muddy, but upon closer inspection it grew more clear. This river was called the River of Forgetfulness, and its source was the fourth mountain one. I think I mentioned in a footnote before that in Chinese, the number 4 is pronounced almost the same as the word for death, and they are usually associated with each other. It swept through the great 9 mountains and seas, controlling the cycle of reincarnation and the path to the underworld. Any living being which died in the 9 mountains and seas, assuming their soul did not disperse, would enter into this great river, and then be carried to the 4th mountain, after which they would begin their cycle anew. There appeared to be endless souls within the great river, most of whom looked around wide-eyed, moaning and screaming. Many struggled to escape the river water, including powerful beasts and mighty cultivators. Of the numerous fierce beasts in the river, one was a pangolin covered with long spikes. It was fully 3,000 meters long and was currently roaring in rage. 1. In Chinese, pangolins have a pretty cool name. The characters literally mean pierce mountain armor. It was half submerged in the river water and struggling mightily. Once it was completely submerged, it would lose its mental faculties. As it struggled desperately, the beast let out a mighty roar. "I'm an immortal from the mountain deity tribe. My grandfather is the Tao Lord of the Wind People of the 7th mountain. How dare you try to drag me into the cycle of reincarnation?" As the beast roared, it began to rise up. It was just on the verge of leaving the water, when suddenly, the river began to seethe. A spray of water burst into the air, which expanded out to form a sea. A rumbling sound could be heard as the beast was submerged. A miserable shriek rang out through the void as the gigantic creature was smashed, transforming into countless discarnate souls that merged into the river water. The scene caused all the surrounding beast souls to tremble with fear and astonishment, even terror. Off in the distance, an old man sat upright, floating above the surface of the water, surrounded by the melodious music of a great Tao. Every bit of his soul radiated immortality, and his body shone with radiant light that spread out in all directions over the vast river. He seemed like a preeminent immortal, towering over the river of forgetfulness. He ignored the water, which seemed incapable of fazing him in the least. I'm an almighty Tao Lord of the sixth mountain. My longevity might have ended, but in the past, the longevity of Tao Lords in the 9 mountains and seas was unlimited. Now, under what authority are you dragging me into the cycle of reincarnation, fourth mountain? The old man suddenly looked up, and his eyes seemed like 2 suns. Any souls that he looked at immediately began to scream and dissipate. Chapter 779, The Northern Reaches Rooted. This chapter was sponsored by Jake Ridgway, Jose Acosta Comas, and Michael Gibson.